Okay, and it looks like we are here. We are live. Hello, everyone.
Good morning, or
And
almost afternoon.
Almost afternoon, so let's make sure that we're all tucked in here and everything's working. And let me say hi to everyone. Thanks for making it out again here today. And let me get the little ZEISS thing off the screen here and show us. Hello, everyone.
Okay.
And we are here. We made it back once again.
Sure, absolutely.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us here again. The conference has had some pretty good crowds.
Yeah, it was a lot of questions.
A lot of questions. We've had hundreds of doctors, and it's been a lot of fun over this past day. And I just want to thank everyone for showing up, especially on a weekend.
And a lot of people taking advantage of those discounts.
Yes,
so the sales are robust.
This was the great part about this is that everyone, people are coming in, taking advantage of it, going into the exhibit hall. So it's been really a fun show so far. Today we're going to be talking to a few more people from the conference. You're going to talk to Steve Silberberg again, talking about building a medical optometry practice and how you do it.
He's going to talk about the business.
The business end of things this time,
end.
yes. Not clinical, we're talking business. So
Yeah.
This should be fun. So again, if you haven't taken advantage of the specials here, let me plop this up on the screen again just so everyone can know. At the show, ZEISS is offering discounts on their equipment. You can see up on the screen. Discounts across their entire product line, but to get these discounts, you have to, go into the booths in the exhibit hall.
They each have a booth. Each equipment
different
has a separate booth.
Correct. So let me.
An expert manning that booth. So if you have any questions, the salesperson that's in that booth is an expert on that particular device.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and so you can get good guidance. Let me actually log in and show people again. If they haven't registered for the conference or if for some reason they haven't been here, shame on you. You should.
Some people have to work Saturdays.
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the big problems. Some people do have to work on Saturdays, and it's not always easy to come in and do this. But let me pop open this thing so people can see what I'm talking about here instead of hearing me blab. Okay, so you can see up on your screen right now, this is the conference, and you see on the left side of the screen the thing that says Exhibit Hall. Right there where my cursor is, when you click on it, pops open, and you can see that they have different booths for each brand. You have the fundus imaging, you have the OCT. There's one all about Forum. We're going to talk about Forum a lot today. So Forum is ZEISS's software that ties everything together. One for perimetry, and then sort of the other products that ZEISS makes, their slit lamps and so forth. So
right.
So basically, a booth for each big category. Come on in if you're looking to purchase. They'll have folks standing by who can actually chat with you via text chat and get you those discounts that you deserve.
Can you list the discounts that they're offering? So
it says on let me pop that form open again so you can see it. So on the form itself, you can see that, so click on live chat and they will disclose unbeatable pricing.
Yep.
So the pricing is unbeatable. So I don't know what that is exactly, but
that means you got to beat them down.
So go into the booth to get that pricing because we obviously can't tell you here. Although I have to say I was contacted by people via email last night asking how we can get the discounts. So again, I just told them what I said right now. Just go into the booth.
You got to go to the booth. You can't just do it without that.
Right. I can't help you. You got to go into the booth because that's the one way that it actually shows how you were part of the conference and you registered for it and everything else. So
yeah, for those of you that missed yesterday's conference, the theme, at least here when we were discussing things, was just you could use one sentence: build and they will come. So basically, we're discussing the fact that so many optometrists want to start getting into medical optometry. Mm-hmm. They've been beaten down by managed care, beaten down by mail order, by discounting contact lenses. The one area where you have to come into the office and be seen, and if you can't do it by mail order, is medical optometry.
Very true.
So how do you get into medical optometry? And we were discussing that yesterday. A lot of the concentration, we had one expert on diabetes yesterday, mm-hmm. and that is a growth industry.
Yes, tragically.
And one of the points I asked the individual was, can you build a referral practice having that? He said, absolutely. He has difficulty with the primary care physicians because many of them don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So when you send some complex type of picture to them, they don't understand it. But the endocrinologists and the cardiologists they get it.
Yep.
So if you can lock into a couple of endocrinologists and cardiologists and start showing your expertise with diabetes and having some retinal pictures to show them, that you will be speaking the same language, and before you know it, your office will be filled with people that are diabetic.
Right, and you can see I put up on the screen right now just a report, sample report from the ZEISS OCT. So the idea that you can actually use this technology and then send the reports forward to these doctors is very powerful. Primary care doctors, I think, a lot of the times they would like to have this shorthand summary of what's going on, and if you have the tech to do it, it's very helpful.
With primary care doctors, most of them are staring at a screen. If I go for a checkup now, I don't get touched by a human.
Right.
The primary care doctor is always looking at a screen and looking at lab reports, and don't touch them. So they're interested in moving people into specialty care when they have a specialized problem.
Right. And so, I think as Dr. Chow said yesterday too, if you have endocrinologists as well who also do want to follow their patients very closely but might not have this tech available, you could build a referral practice pretty well that way.
Why don't you show them that picture of that retina, that widescreen retina?
Yeah.
Just that is impressive.
Yep. And so this is the kind of tech that if you have in your office, it would almost certainly generate referrals from endocrinologists who care about their patients and might want to be able to see things like microaneurysms.
And the important part is you can get those pictures without dilating.
Right.
You can with a larger percentage with dilation, but you can get a very good picture without it.
Yep.
And for those of you ODs that are in countries, because many of you are not watching this from the United States and you may not have the legal ability to dilate as yet, you can have this instrument without dilation to start showing patients that they're having difficulties. So it has a double advantage. And there are many patients that want to go back to work and they don't want dilation. So if you can manage to see a full view of a retina without dilating, a tremendous advantage in your practice.
Yep, and as we learned yesterday during our interviews that we did, some of the big advantages of this latest generation of wide field cameras has to do with the technology assisting you in actually taking the photos. So one of the big drawbacks on the earlier generations was that it was sometimes difficult to get a good picture. And what would end up happening is you'd get lids and lashes and so forth, and so you'd end up taking the pictures again and again, and you'd constantly have to reposition the patient to get it right. ZEISS has put, it seems to me at least, that they've put a large investment in actually making the pictures easier to take with this system, so that you don't have to keep doing reshoots.
And many retinologists are swamped with patients, and they're happy if you don't send the patient back. And this would give you the ability to mail these photos over to a retinologist, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yep.
And ask them, what do you think? Do you want to see this patient? Mm-hmm. Or is this just an abnormality that you can just have to have watchful waiting?
Yep.
So that would save trips for the patient. Again, it makes you much more of an expert than you would be without this equipment.
Yep. And so, we'll be talking again today with the folks from ZEISS all about this technology. One thing that we're going to be talking a lot about today, and in fact, I think our first interview, is that right? Our first interview is with Samantha
Healy.
So Samantha is giving 2 talks today at the conference, and let me pull those up so you guys can actually see what they are. And Samantha is going to be with us in a few minutes just to talk about IT things, because one of the biggest issues here, let me pull this up so you can see it. There we go. So one of the biggest issues with all of this technology is that it generates copious amounts of data, and you need to be able to do something with it. And ZEISS has developed this software suite called Forum, which is designed to handle all of this data. And so Samantha's giving 2 lectures here all about Forum. And again, Forum is sort of an all-encompassing term. Let's see if I can show you.
I don't know, Samantha. Does she work with ZEISS?
Yes, so Samantha is with ZEISS, and so she's gonna, these little lectures that she's giving are sort of tutorials about how the software works, and we're gonna talk to her about it today as well.
But we do have an optometrist talking about, two optometrists talking about glaucoma.
Yep.
But they're talking about it right now, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so that lecture is going on right now.
So if you haven't, if you're just tuning in, you may want to get over to that lecture. You only miss 10 minutes.
Yep.
And it's not, you don't have to worry about cope for this, so you can be over there.
Show up late.
Be less than the allotted hour. So.
Yep. Yeah. And so no tests. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. So excellent. So yeah, so Samantha's going to be talking to us in a few minutes. We'll have Steve Silverberg back again, as we mentioned as well, to talk about the tech again and sort of implementing it in practice on the business end of things. And hopefully Steve is online already this morning.
Yep, he's working.
And I'm asking.
Yes, Steve Silverberg is our partner in CE Wire. He is the brains to getting the best possible speakers that are on a caliber similar to the speakers that are on today. You're really blessed here for the price of admission.
Yeah.
Which is nothing, free.
So yep.
You're getting some real quality speakers and real quality education.
Yeah. So Steve is here, which is good, and we'll be able to talk to him about stuff.
So many of you might have the question, well, I missed yesterday. I missed those 3 hours. The answer is you'll be putting these lectures up.
Right. So all these lectures will be up online, and so you'll be able to look at all of them for a month on demand. So they'll be here if you missed it yesterday or you're missing it today.
So the key today is to try to get into the lecture so you can ask questions. The speakers are standing by to answer your questions in real time. Yep. The salespeople are standing by to answer your questions in real time about the equipment.
Yep. And the discounts, as you were listing up here, so they can give you the real scoop as to what's going on with all that. So, excellent.
Also, if any questions of us, all you have to do is type it in, right?
Right. Yeah. So you can take a look right up. Excuse me. On the live stream beneath where the video is running, there's a chat box, which I'm sure you saw me pop up on the screen before. So anyone can come in and you can type and ask us questions. Okay. So otherwise, Steve says we're looking good. A little stoppage. So, yeah. So.
Just want to remind people one more time about the equipment that they can purchase.
Sure. So yeah. So let's run through everything that's been going on here. So let me start from the beginning. Boop. Here we go. So. As we learned yesterday, ZEISS makes a full line of equipment that you all knew just by visiting any sort of trade show. As you walk through, ZEISS always has one of the biggest booths there. But here's sort of the equipment that we've been talking about and that they're showing off at the show. So the Claris 500, and again, this is the new ultra-wide field fundus imaging camera. One thing that's immediately striking just by looking at the brochure is how small it is. I remember the very first generation of these machines from, what is it, maybe 15 years ago, maybe longer now, where they would use mirrors. You could literally walk into these machines. They were that big. They used that many mirrors. You could open them up and physically walk inside. And they used mirrors, and they were complicated beasts. This thing, as you can see just by looking at the picture, physically is small. The footprint is much smaller, so it takes up a lot less space in your office. Critically, we learned yesterday, it uses lenses instead of mirrors, and the optics are sealed. So the maintenance issues, will probably be lower, right? You don't have that terrible situation where you open the thing up and you have 15,000 mirrors to clean off.
Absolutely.
So this is a definite improvement.
And the fact that these small footprints means that you don't have to take up that valuable space.
Yep.
Many of you are practicing in areas where the square footage is going out of sight for cost.
Yep.
So you have smaller equipment to take up less space. So that is really a consideration.
Yep. And as you can see, the output of this device is pretty stunning. So moving on, we're talking about the ZEISS line of OCT units. ZEISS is a brand name that's been around for a very long time now. But I guess sort of like Camry or Corolla, they keep extending it and coming up with new products, right? They don't sort of rest on their laurels. They come up with new things all the time. And one of the newest things is ZEISS with Angioplex, right? So this is OCT angiography, probably the hottest topic, I would say, in OCT
well,
today.
they're devoting a whole full day for the retinologists in Portland.
Yeah, that's true. We were shocked to discover that. It's upcoming this weekend. I guess we're going to that, where they're just having a conference on OCTA. That's what the whole thing is about. So we're gonna attend that, and it was sort of fun to see this. As we learned yesterday, so Angioplex is a module that you can add on to your existing ZEISS HD 5000 unit.
Right.
So it's a software thing, and you can see it takes incredible pictures of the blood vessels. So take a look at that.
But isn't it the same, a marvelous marketing ability? Many optometrists are in smaller communities. Optometry is spread out around the United States. Ophthalmology, not only is there a shortage of ophthalmologists, but ophthalmologists tend to be in denser population areas.
Right.
So if you're living in an area where there is no ophthalmologist and certainly no retinologist, isn't it great to be able to ship these pictures over to them before you make the patients make that long trip to the retinologist?
Yep.
So that's another advantage.
Yep. And again, we're talking about the HD OCT 5000. So this is a ZEISS OCT unit, and talking about some of the new features in it. This pano map analysis. This is a great tool. As you can see, it summarizes the data, the output of the machine, which is good, not just for sending to another doctor or maybe a primary care practitioner who doesn't know too much about this, but also to the patient, right? You can see that this provides a great deal of education that the patient can swallow as well. And again, a bunch of other new features, this anterior segment premiere module, smart HD scan patterns, and so on and so forth. And instead of just looking at this little brochure, the best thing to do is to go into the exhibit hall, into the ZEISS booth, and you can take a look at all kinds of other materials, including little movies that they have, and product demos. So instead of listening to me blab about it, the ZEISS HD OCT 500 is the entry-level unit that they have. So if you haven't got an OCT unit in your office yet, you're just starting out, this would be a great way to get introduced to it. Very easy to use. And again, look at this thing. The footprint is tiny. So very important, especially if you're space constrained.
And most important, this is not a complicated machine to teach your assistant. So this is the type of thing where you're going to be practicing not two-hand optometry anymore. You get this equipment in, it's your assistants that are doing all the heavy lifting.
Right.
And all you have to do is the analysis.
Right. And again, I'll get on my soapbox again. We've seen people on ODwire say, oh, I do all the testing myself. And
Proudly.
they say it proudly, but the reality is, if you're investing in equipment like this that's relatively expensive, it is worthwhile. The companies themselves have spent an inordinate amount of money making these systems incredibly easy to use, right? The industrial design is, to me, almost unbelievable.
Even I could use it.
So there you go. And so they did that so that you wouldn't have to mess with the machines routinely, so that your staff could go in and do this for you. And I think it's well worth taking advantage of that.
I mean, and the rule of thumb is if you are doing the work that someone at a lower salary level can do, your salary has now dropped to the level of that other person.
Paul reminds me of this all the time as I'm on my knees here.
Yes, absolutely. Adam loves to do the tinkering himself. I said, hire someone.
Now, I will say this, there is a benefit, especially in the beginning, to doing all the tinkering yourself, to learning how all the systems work properly.
That's correct.
However, as Dr. Silverberg pointed out yesterday, at this point, his techs could probably take a much better scan than he can and do it much faster because they just do it every day.
I mean, I must admit, I did contact lenses for, 50 years?
Yeah.
I never instructed a patient by myself. At the beginning, I did it with firm lenses.
Yeah.
I have never instructed a hydrogel patient in my entire career.
That's true. He didn't even instruct me when he fit me with lenses
I
when I was a kid.
I never applied the lenses to people. I was always used to help because they could do it better.
That's true.
Except I had one technician.
Oh,
she
boy.
had the longest fingernails. Man, that was scary to see her going to try to get a lens on people, and that's so that the nail was going right overhead. So, Maria, if you're listening, that was you.
All right. So, point taken. So, other things that we're looking at, and you can see in the booth, the ZEISS Photo 800 and 600. So this is an integrated OCT and fundus imaging all-in-one unit. Again, if you want an all-in-one, and it's a good fit for some practices, If you
Right.
just want to have one unit that does it all, that's something you can do. There's a booth dedicated to perimetry in there, the new HFA3 from ZEISS. So this is, again, another topic that, you all have perimeters, and this is a necessary thing to have.
I only had a tangent screen. You don't even know what that is,
No,
do you?
I mean, this...
You don't know what a tangent screen is.
Is this
And I bet you
before electricity? I mean, what is this?
It's a big screen. We used to stand there and shake shake a wand to patients. It would take hours, and of course you didn't know what the hell was going on. So
Yeah, I'm sure that test had great accuracy and was repeatable, right?
oh yeah. In the
Anyway,
Stone Age.
so fortunately we have things like the HFA3 now. And again, not only are these systems accurate and repeatable, but what's nice about it too, again, ZEISS is using their technology to make the tests faster and easier to use. This is critical, right? You don't want to have to keep repeating tests. So with each successive generation, the machines are getting better and getting faster and easier for your staff. So they have something called Sit Faster. Go in there or take a look at it in the booth. They'll tell you all about it. And also, one thing that impresses me too, again, is the footprint of this machine. I've seen perimeters before that are much bigger than this. It looks like they're doing everything in their power to try to get these things as small as they can, which is really impressive. And I'll say again that there are specials on all of this stuff. So please go on in to the booths and check it out. There's specials on the forum software as well. And we're going to be talking all about forum momentarily. And so I'm going to pull up, just because I don't have, forum is a hard thing to, see if I can pull it up here just to show people. It's a hard thing to describe without actually having a computer in front of me that's running it. But you can see just from looking on my screen, Forum, it's a suite of softwares, and it scales obviously down to the level of the office and scales all the way up to hospitals. And it's a way to manage all of the images and the data that your devices are generating in a sort of comprehensive way. And we're going to get Samantha here in a couple of minutes to show us and tell us how this all works. Yeah. And I think it's critical to understand too that the way that they've designed Forum, and I think Samantha's going to go over this, it's not just limited, as far as I understand, to ZEISS's own equipment. So the software can work across other devices, and Samantha's going to tell us all about this too. So do we have Samantha's? Oh, we do. Okay,
Yep, got her number.
Okay. So let me get this cranked up here, and maybe we can get Samantha going.
Sure. So you'll have the opportunity of hearing Samantha to lecture a little bit later on.
Yep.
But she can talk about the Forum device. That basically, as of yesterday, we were really concentrating more on diabetes, and the discussions today it's going to be more on glaucoma. Mm-hmm. Both of them are incredibly important because both of them are increasing as populations age. What was there? Some sort of statistic yesterday that if you're over 65, there's a 70% chance that you're pre-diabetic or diabetic?
Yeah, it was something terrible. It was in Paul Chauce's talk. Yeah, it was really alarming.
I ate a croissant this morning with guilt. But I ate it anyway. So
after hearing this lecture yesterday, right, we're all trying to be better. We're thinking about it. Paul comes to me this morning right before we get on the air. He brings all I want in the morning is coffee, right? Like just a nice black coffee. He brings me this thing that's just this milky, foamy, sugary disaster. I'm like, what?
A cappuccino.
This is not coffee. What is this? You're going to kill us. And then these chocolate croissants. I'm like,
I wanted to get him in the French mood for the meeting today.
This was just awful. I'm like, come on, man. You got to get into the spirit of the thing. I don't want to. Okay. So let's see. I got Samantha's number here. Okay. Let's see if I can get this right.
You've reached 616.
Nope. That was not right. Let's see. You wrote the wrong number.
What?
You wrote the wrong number.
Oh, great.
This is the correct one. So my trusty assistant here.
Hey, I do one of these a day.
I mean, geez. All right, let me. Sorry.
How did I do that?
What's that they say on the internet? You had one job.
Oh, it was. I wrote a 1 instead of a 7. Ah.
Oh boy. All right, no problem. We got it here. That's better.
Hello, this is Samantha.
Hey,
Hi, Samantha. We almost didn't meet you thanks to me. How are you doing today?
How are you doing?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
So I trust Paul with just a small bits of responsibility
so
on the
little to
show.
do.
I give, and so yeah, so he wrote your number wrong, but we found you, which is good. So thank you for putting it in your email. So how's everything going?
I'm glad. Everything's going great this morning. How about you guys?
Doing well. Yeah. So this morning we were talking a little bit about Forum, and I just realized as I was studying it and trying to really understand it that I really know nothing. The software seems incredibly comprehensive. I was going through all the pages. And so I was just sort of wondering if you could maybe step us through. And I mentioned something, by the way, about Forum as well, that it also works with non-ZEISS hardware. And I'm thinking that's correct, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's actually, it's a pretty common misconception that we hear that it's only for ZEISS devices, which it's not. So Forum can handle images from nearly any device on the marketplace, not just our ZEISS devices. And we do this by using the DICOM imaging standard that any vendor can use to allow the images and tests to transfer seamlessly from from the devices right into Forum. So I'm glad you asked that because, yeah, it's not just for ZEISS instruments.
Right. And so maybe you could give us a little background about what Forum actually is and how it works and what makes it sort of different from other platforms.
Absolutely. So Forum can be integrated into the clinic, and it really allows the doctors a place to look at all of the patient's test history and images in one spot. And the main difference that it has, I'd say, compared to some of the other imaging softwares, is it allows you the ability to not only just view the test or the images as a PDF or a static report, it actually uses the raw data from the devices, and it gives us the ability to manipulate and to interact with the test. And so, with our glaucoma and retina workplace, really once you select that patient in one click, it's going to pull up all of the patient's past visual fields and OCTs and analyze that data and gives you a progression. So it really paints a clear pictures for the doctors on where the patient is at and how are they doing. Are they stable? Is there any regression? So it's really great using the raw data. You're not just looking at a PDF or a printout. It gives you much more than that. There's quite a few tools that you can use with both of the workplaces.
Right. Now, you mentioned a term there, workplaces. What's the difference between the two packages?
Yeah, so the glaucoma workplace has all of the visual fields and also now our OCTs, the RNFL OCTs, and it also brings in the map cubes for ganglion cell analysis. So glaucoma workplace is great. There's a few different tabs you would see or menu options you have with each workplace. So, for example, with glaucoma, we have the ability to do a structure function, GPA, and that's where it's going to give you the guided progression analysis and really an overall picture of how they're doing with glaucoma based off the visual fields, the RNFL OCTs, and then also ganglion cell. And then you can click the overview, which would give you just in one click, right and left eye, every single visual field that patient has had in order and visit date, just on one screen. So you're not having to go in there and search all of their tests. So it's pretty neat how it brings in that raw data and analyzes the progression with glaucoma. And then with our retina workplace, it brings in the MAC Cube OCTs and then any of the raster OCTs. So I love it. It's great. The doctors can go in, click on, for example, MAC thickness analysis last 3 visits, and it's going to pull that raw data. So it's almost like you're in front of the OCT itself. So you can scroll through the cuts, and it does that for all 3 of the 3 most recent MAC cubes. So when you're scrolling through, you're not just looking at one visit, you're going through the cuts of all 3 visits at one time. So it's really great. It's easy to compare, the change analysis, all the settings that you have on the OCT, you also have in Retina Workplace. And it can bring in your fundus photos too. So you could even overlay a MAC cube and register it over today's fundus images. So there's quite a few tools and things that you can do with both workplaces. So I'm excited to show those later today.
Wow. So and if you're in a mixed environment where you may not have all ZEISS equipment, you can actually use that hardware to work with the software. Is that correct?
Yes. So the right now with Glaucoma Workplace, it's for the ZEISS Humphrey visual field and the Cirrus OCT. However, in Retina Workplace, yes, it's just the Cirrus OCT, but you can bring in fundus photos from different images. But let's say you don't have a Humphrey visual field. You can still go into the document display mode and pull up, select today's visit and maybe the last few visual fields, highlight those tests and pull them up all side by side. There are just more analysis features and tools in the workplaces that really work. I would say they're a little bit more designed for the ZEISS instruments.
Sure.
So basically, the Forum is competing against other image management systems. So could you just summarize what the difference is?
Yeah, the main difference I would say is the static images versus the raw data, right? So with a lot of the other imaging systems, you're just looking at a printout. So you can basically pull up a few different visits, look at those PDF reports, and make your own analysis. With the workplaces in Forum, you have the ability to really manipulate that data, right? So, and it gives you an analysis. You can scroll through the cuts at the same time. So I really think that's where Forum stands out, is allowing you to actually go in, manipulate, and interact with that data versus just looking at a PDF.
Right.
So basically, most optometrists now have some sort of electronic medical records. So how does it interface with Forum?
Yeah, so each EMR works a little bit differently, but I'd say the most common feature that they have is the ability to send the patient's demographic data directly from the EMR to the instruments. So the technicians are no longer, let's say they go to sit down at the OCT, they're no longer having to go search for a patient or add new patients. So that the EMR system directly sends their demographic. So when the technician sits down, there's a work list, and that patient's name is already there based off today's schedule. They select the patient, they do the scans, and then immediately exports back into Forum. And then Forum has the capability to forward on any PDF reports back into the EMR. So they do all work pretty seamlessly with the instruments, and having the technicians be able to save time, or it prevents errors, right? The technicians entering in the patient's names incorrectly or having duplicate patients on the instrument. So Forum kind of streamlines that process with the EMR. And then the other thing that it can do is also quite a few of the EMRs have what we call a Forum launch button. So when you're in your EMR and you select your patient, you then hit launch Forum, and Forum will refresh and pop up on your screen with that patient and take you right into all of the images.
Right.
So you're no longer having to, go into Forum and then pull up your patient. So it can work that way too. Like I said, all work a little bit differently, but it's pretty seamless process with Forum.
Right. So a technical question here. If I wanted to implement Forum in my office, what are the actual technical requirements? Is this server-based? Is it web-based? How does it work?
It is server and web-based. I'd be able to get you a little bit more details on that. But yeah, every EMR works a little bit differently. So usually what will happen is we will give the office, okay, here are the requirements that you need, and then we will work with that EMR company and letting them know exactly, what they need to do to get it up and running, and we'll work with them along that process.
Did you work along with the technicians to train them as well?
Yes. Yeah. So my background, I'm a former technician. And I've been in ophthalmology now for about 10 years with ZEISS and at different practices. And I think that's my favorite part is I work in the clinic with the doctors and with the technicians and really understand their workflow and then show them how we can fit Forum and make it work with their workflow from check-in to check-out. So that's really my main role. After Forum is installed and implemented, I go out and I work with the staff and train them on how to use it.
Did you use Forum in real time while the patient is sitting there, or do you put the data in after the patient leaves?
Nope. So the data is already brought in right from the EMR. So all of that patient's history and demographic data is there. And what we do ahead of time is that we will connect the instruments and transfer all of the old data so that once we officially go live, all of the testing and all their previous tests are already in there.
Right. Can I ask a loaded question? You probably can't answer this, but what the heck, right? That's why we're here.
Sure.
We'll
try it.
So if I've committed to purchasing Forum and I want to go ahead and do it, typically how long does it take from the time, you say I'm going ahead with this to the time where the system's implemented? Is it a period of several months or weeks?
I would say it varies depending on the size of the practice, right? If we're working with a small practice, it really has everything up and ready to go. We don't need to make any changes to, their main operating systems, then it's a pretty quick process. If we're working with large, universities or multi-site practices, there's quite a few steps in making sure that everything is prepared and ready to go. But as soon as it's installed, we're on site training them and how to use it. And so that's a pretty quick process there.
Well, let's say that I'm starting from scratch and I just bought a Claris and a Cirrus, one of each, and I plop them into my office. Is that a pretty quick implementation?
Yes, that is very quick. So that is mostly done remotely from our installer. So it really wouldn't even take somebody getting out on site. We do it remote and get everything up and running.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's great. It's, seeing how it works, that's my favorite thing is being able to go out there and train. And once it's all done and installed, just seeing the impact that it can make in the clinic for the doctors, for the technicians, it's pretty powerful.
Good. Neat stuff. So I guess everyone should probably check out your booth, anyone who's listening to this. So check out your booth to learn a lot more than what they could see on my screen over here, because I just put up some very basic
and not miss your presentation today.
And not miss your presentations, that's right. So you're going to actually go through the real deal, right, in your talks about how this all works.
Right, and you'll see what exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the workplaces and how you can manipulate that data. So in these sessions, I kind of deep dive on all of the tools and features that you have in both workplaces, and also just pulling up your patients in the document display mode. So we'll deep dive into all of that later today.
And ZEISS is gentle with the older practitioners that are afraid of computers and electronic medical records. Is there a lot of hand-holding involved?
Yes, those are my favorite doctors to work with. So, just that's the thing. I'll be there in clinic and just really making sure that everything clicks and makes sense. So we're gentle with that.
All right. Well, very cool. Well,
Not to
Samantha, thanks so much for this. And I guess, we're going to tune into your presentations, and good luck with it. And I know that when I post this stuff on ODwire, there's going to be questions afterwards. So if anybody has questions, I'll make sure that I get them in front of you so you can answer them.
Please do. Yes, I will be happy to answer any questions. And thank you both for your time today.
All right. Thanks so much.
Nice speaking with you, Samantha.
All right.
Bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so it's pulling all these packages together.
Yep.
The people that are not tech savvy don't have a shot anymore. I mean, there's nothing. It's awful.
Well, I mean, you say tech savvy, but OCT in itself is a very complicated technology, right? So if you're going to be using something like OCT, you need to be tech savvy on some level.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But there are some practices that still don't have electronic medical records.
Really?
They don't even know what EMR stands for. That's why I keep repeating electronic medical records.
I can't imagine at this point that what is there, maybe 10%, 20% maybe?
I don't know. Just like there are many practices that don't have sinks in their exam room.
But the difference is, back in the day, most of the data that was being generated in your practice was by pen. You were writing stuff down.
Yes.
These days, most of the data that's being generated is being generated by automated systems, whether it's an autorefractor or an OCT unit or something like the perimeter, right?
You have to do it.
It's digital to begin with, so yes.
Right.
You have to make that leap.
So if you can't make that leap, you better get some younger practitioners in that can leap right in there.
And I understand the reluctance, or at least I used to understand the reluctance. However, these days the tools have become so much better and so much easier to use that it would be very surprising to me if someone had real trouble.
I mean, I still have the pains because we were one of the first practices to go computer in the 1980s.
That is
true.
true.
You were there.
I was there.
You were a teenager.
I witnessed that.
And you kept saying, "Dad, they're ripping you off. They're ripping you off." And we had two guys that came in, two experts in quotes, and they used to work in our practice overnight so they could start putting records in because we couldn't afford to stop everything that we were doing during the day. So they worked every night. And one day they had a fight between the two of them. They broke up, and we found these computers waiting for us and no one to take care of it.
Yep.
Yep. Oh, those were the days, my friend.
Yeah.
So
But so back then, the system that you developed was custom made, right? There was no such thing
we had to do
as an
everything from the
EHR,
ground up.
EMR. You developed it from the ground up. So this is the kind of thing that happens when you have contractors building the stuff for you. It's almost like building a house.
Yeah. So people are there to help you now.
And so
and
now
hold your
these
hand.
days, these packages are standardized. You have something like Forum, and then you have something like EHR packages, like the one that we're most familiar with is Uprise here. Where it's web-based, where you have teams of people who are running this. It's not just onesies and twosies. You actually have real support behind it. So
for those of you who have been practiced for 30 plus years, this is the future. So you better get on board. That's it.
yeah, I mean, it's very much like the the history of the automobile, right? Where back in the beginning there were like 300 different car manufacturers, and everything was custom done.
Oh, don't even talk about it. I just got a new car.
But now
I can't even look at the instruction manual.
But now, of course, everything is standardized, and you don't have to worry.
I'm still only using the windshield wiper, and it's not ready. One day you have to give me some lessons
Oh my
with
God.
the car.
Anyway,
That's hopeless.
Anyway, hopefully most people aren't like him, and they're more tech forward at this point. But who knows? So that was really great to hear, and I'm hoping our next person. Are we going to be talking to Steve next, or are we talking?
No, talk to Steve next.
Steve is going to be next, so we're slotting him in at.
But my ignorance should inspire other ignorant people. If you have questions, write them in. Don't be shy.
Oh yeah.
Because I, for one, am very understanding. When you say I don't understand what you're talking about, so please write in, call in, and we're going to be talking to Steve in a few moments. So just to review with Steve, he is our partner in ZEISS.
Yep.
And Steve is responsible for auditioning the speakers. He goes to every course that speakers give, and we listen to the speakers. And there's not an accident when you get the best speakers in the country to go online, because speakers love it. Because the
don't have to go
speakers
anywhere.
today, they're answering your questions from the comfort of their home, maybe in their pajamas today.
Right. Yep.
So the speakers love it, and we can get the best quality, and that's why you have these wonderful speakers here. The speakers that are speaking yesterday and today,
Yep.
because it's an online type of program, so it's much easier.
Yep.
So Steve does that, but the important part of Steve today is that he has a successful practice. He's in the trenches.
Yep.
And he has a multi-associate practice. He is not afraid of computers,
No.
even though he's more mature, on the mature end of the practice. He's the senior partner in a multi-associate practice. And he always buys and he looks carefully, and he's a ZEISS enthusiast, so he'll be able to talk about the business of optometry today, because, as if yesterday, if the theme was build and they shall come, I have to quote Reb Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh boy.
And Reb Tevye said, it's no crime to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So our goal on ODwire, at least, is we have several missions on ODwire. I'm just digress for a moment. We love to give information, so we keep optometrists up to date to the minute with breaking news, because we have the ability to be an online company where we can just break news in an instant. And we do educate, hopefully an unbiased education. We have always two sides to a story. And we would like to see our people successful. And it's not magical to become a success. You think, oh, he was just lucky. It takes a lot of hard work, but it takes some creativity, and it takes the ability to have the guts to go into something new and not be afraid you're going to fail with it. And that's, you need the instrumentation. If you're going to go into medical optometry, and most of you have no choice. Let's face it, you don't have a choice. Contact lenses now are gone. We do have contact lens sponsors on ODwire, but the reality is patients are getting contact lenses online. They're getting it at discount places, so you can't make profits from contact lenses. You got the managed care companies, the optical managed care companies that are cutting. They don't give you any increases, so you're not making too much on these patients. So what's left? And what's left is medical optometry.
Sure.
And that's where we come in. And Steve will give you the tips on what to do and how to build a practice, a medical optometry practice, using the equipment that ZEISS has to offer.
So one thing, if I can give a tip, I mean, one thing that I know I do personally is I go to a lot of these conferences and I get to meet a lot of different clinicians. And one thing that I see among the successful clinicians, the commonality that I see is they are willing to extend themselves. When I walk around an exhibit hall with Steve, now Steve, you mentioned, is a mature practitioner, right? I mean, he's approaching.
He's been around the block
age.
a few times.
But despite the fact that he's approaching retirement age, when I walk around with him, and there are a couple of other guys like him, when I walk around the exhibit hall, he knows everything about the different products. As I'm walking around, he'll go to the vendors and he'll know about these products. When he gets to the booth, it won't be a surprise. He'll understand how the new what the new technology is, how it works, whether or not it would fit or not, whether he gives it a thumbs up or thumbs down. As I walk around, he keeps himself up to date and educated on what's going on.
Unlike me, I mean, I'm like a deer in the headlights. Whether I go to Home Depot or I go to a show to look at new equipment,
right?
It's all new to me.
And again, there's other clinicians, I won't name names, and I walk around with them at these shows, and they can tell me chapter and verse about a new technology. The last one, in fact, I was at the last conference, I was with a guy, we're talking about amniotic membranes, and he was just going on and on about the immunology and talking my ear off about it, and I'm like, you're 60 plus years old. How do you know all this? Well, he keeps up. This is not something that he learned in school or even existed, right? When he was in school, but he keeps up. And I think that's the commonality that I see among a lot of the successful practitioners. They're willing to go out and actually keep on top of what's happening.
And getting to the first $1 million gross is the hard part. Mm-hmm. Once you hit that $1 million mark, sky is the limit, because at that point you're hiring associates,
Right.
you're hiring assistants, you're becoming the chief executive officer of your practice, and learning how to get to that first million is what the goal should be for all you younger practitioners. So Steve is going to help not only the mature practices, but the younger people. How do you get into this game
Right.
of medical optometry?
And when I see skepticism, or I see people, poo-pooing the approach that other docs take, or say, "Oh, this guy's too aggressive," right? He's doing too much. That bothers me.
No, you're never too aggressive.
Because, these are the people who are out there. They're on the cutting edge. They're trying the new technology, and they're trying to implement it and help their patients, right? Like membranes was a classic example. It drives me crazy when I see that only, what was it, something like 400 ODs prescribed
I
last
spent
year.
a lot of years on the lecture circuit, and every lecture I went to, I used to give motivational speeches, or some were technical speeches. But after the meeting, people used to come up to the and talk to you. And every place I went says, "Oh, it's easy for you to talk because of your practice, because of where you are, blah blah blah. My practice is different." Well, the answer is there's no practice is different. There are highly successful practices in small towns, in big cities, but they have all that commonality. They're willing to invest in their practice with new equipment, with new techniques, be the first in your neighborhood. I can assure you, if you get one of the ZEISS products and be the first in your neighborhood, and you can market it properly, which Steve will go into, you're going to get referrals in from professionals and from patients. It's going to be a wow factor. The old folks have nothing to talk about except their illnesses and the doctors they visit. And I can assure you, if you can do something that makes you stand out, you're going to get senior people into your practice. And that is where the money is with dealing with seniors, because everybody has a certain amount of pathology when you get to be a certain age.
Yep.
Can't help it. Okay, with that said, I'll bet you Steve is standing by eagerly wanting to talk to us.
Probably. So let me dial him up here.
I hope we got. I copied his number, so I can't make a mistake on that one.
You did the old cut and paste. Thank God.
So give it a shot.
Okay. All right. So let me find you here, Steve.
Hello.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, Steve. Have you been listening to us?
Absolutely, you're doing a great job. Let me just mute you here because you're a few seconds behind. There you go. As always, doing a great job. Your first lecture was really good, and that forum seems like something I'd love to have.
Yeah,
that's what this conference is all about, learning about these new technologies, like you point out.
Yeah, I mean, I apologize for getting up on the soapbox here like we did a few seconds ago, but it irks me. It grinds my gears when I hear people, who try to say, well, some docs are too aggressive, they're doing too much, they're buying too much equipment or whatever else. It makes me crazy, because really, to be successful, you have to keep up to date, and I think you're a pretty good example of this, how you're constantly out there scratching and looking for new tech.
And the interest, if your ears are burning, basically we mentioned the fact that you have a multi-associate practice, and you're pretty in an upscale neighborhood, and that people might say, well, that's because you have fancy patients. But that isn't so. We have one of the most successful practitioners in Texas that is not in the fanciest neighborhood. He's in a lower middle class neighborhood, but he has a multi-million-dollar practice, and it's built on medical optometry, not on selling glasses.
And you're right, Paul. Where I practice is relatively affluent, I'd say upper middle class. But being in New Jersey, which is the densest state in the country, and I don't mean mentally, there are a lot of towns around our area which are middle class and lower middle class, and we draw from all of them. And the delivery system is the same no matter where the people come from. One thing, let's start off with. You want to know how to build a medical optometric practice. I have no idea what that means. When I first started doing eye care, I had moved from a super optical to a private office about 20 some odd years ago, 25 years ago, and I started seeing patients. I never differentiated that I'm going to build a medical practice. At that point, we were able to get into my first bit of advice to the young OD and even the mid-range OD is to get into all the insurances that you can get into, which most of them are open in this day and age. But just examine the patient like you'd like to be examined by your internist or whatever doctor. The patients are patients. I didn't say I'm going to build a medical practice. I branded my practice in such a way that it looked medical. The doctors wear scrubs. The technicians wear matching scrubs. Well, my opticians wear a shirt and tie if they're a guy and a business casual if they're a woman. So you want to create the brand, but I did that intentionally. And actually, the AOA has not done a great job of explaining what an optometrist is versus an ophthalmologist. I use that to my advantage because we have a beautiful office. It's 5,000 square feet. As you know, we have almost every bell and whistle except for some of the ZEISS equipment that I'd like to talk about a little bit later. And it just, people don't know they're very surprised when I don't take out their cataract or I can't do LASIK surgery, etc. I might be able to do that in Kentucky, or at least PRK. So really, the whole concept of starting a medical model in your practice really should never have taken place. Optometrists should always have practiced to the full extent of the licensure, and in doing so, the medical just comes.
Yeah, and I think people could walk into your practice and they'll know almost immediately. I mean, you may have the working people there between 8 and 9 in the morning, but I'll bet you most of them between 9 and 12 are seniors in your waiting room.
Absolutely. During the week especially. I love between 9 and 12, let's say the average patient is probably 75 to 80 years old. And they build upon themselves. A wise practitioner once said, if you have 100 glaucoma patients, you have no room for anybody else in your office because they come back very frequently. And when they come back, they send other people, etc. You were talking beforehand about cultivating business or relationships with endocrinologists and primary care practitioners, and in my case also rheumatologists. And we have quite a few sending us patients exclusively because of the reports they get back. Now, like Adam and you pointed out, some of those reports are complex, so you send them all the information, but you also summarize it in a very simplistic manner. The rheumatologists get it. Let's say you have a patient taking Plaquenil. Well, they have to be examined in a certain, you have to have a baseline examination, etc. So you do the OCT that you're supposed to do. You do a central field, and you send them back, and you summarize the report. And they're not getting this from the ophthalmologist. They might get one sentence letter, the patient's fine, or the patient has very rarely have toxicity. But over the course of time, when they have more confidence in you, they'll start sending you patients because they feel that they're getting better care than the local OMD, if that's the case. Now, organizing in your office, I'm as undetailed as I possibly can be at home. My wife takes care of everything, but in the office, I'm very detailed. The staff knows what to do, even to the point you say, well, how do you become medical? Typically, you'd like to know, for example, how we pre-test the average patient coming in as a new patient. I think that would be valuable information. If it's an adult, we'll do a screening visual field on the Humphrey matrix, a very simple instrument. We do have the HFA also for more complex visual field testing, but they all get that. They get a puff. They get a retinal photo screening from a regular digital camera. Now, this is where the key comes in. My staff is so well trained that they'll recognize cupping of the optic nerve, macular drusen, and I'll get a page, and I could pull up the image in my office, and they'll say, should we do a macular scan? Should we do an OCT of the nerve? Even before I've seen the patient, they're trained well enough to do the test I want to before even seeing the patient. And that takes a lot of detail, a lot of training, but when you have good people that have been with you for many years, that's how it has to be done. It's difficult, but we've accomplished it. You also mentioned about the economics, and you were correct. Getting to that first million is a struggle, and probably took me, 10 years to do that. Multiplying that to multi-million dollars is easy. And it's exactly as you said, by hiring doctors first as associates, and I also have a partner now, and we have an associate, and we work together. Doing it, you have to be very, very organized also. We mostly pre-appoint our patients, and because a lot of people are coming back for care, we won't have two people coming in, for example, for a threshold visual field at the same time. The people who make appointments know that we can't do that because two people can't be on the instrument at the same time. So it takes a lot of organization in that regard.
Right. Steve,
Many years.
but may want to go back because we have a lot of younger people watching this. And so why don't we start from the beginning? So if you have a person they're all motivated now. We've given them the pep talk for 2 days. They want to start getting involved buying equipment. What equipment would you recommend for a first-time buyer to break into medical optometry? They have limited funds. What would you tell them to start with?
The two things they need, well, first of all, a lot of pathology is anterior segment, and it doesn't involve ZEISS, I understand, but the anterior segment, really it's a slit lamp, your knowledge, and a few other little utensils. Posterior segment, though, and glaucoma and things like that, the two things you would certainly need is a visual field tester, and I had mentioned the Matrix. It has the capability of doing threshold fields as well as quick screening fields. That's not a very expensive device. And then a simple retinal photography system also, again, they're becoming less and less expensive because of all the newer technologies, the wide field camera being one of the things we're talking about. But those two things would be something I would start at the very beginning. You also can get OCTs on the market now used from various sources. You have a nice vendor on ODwire, I believe his name is I forget now, but he will sell used equipment, and they still work fine. So that would be a good starting point where I would say the visual field instrument, a simple fundus camera, and then an OCT of a used quality, just so you can take basic pictures of the nerve and have some data to use when you eventually upgrade to another instrument. And those would be the three things. Now, we have cell counters and VEPs and MPODs and other bells and whistles in our office that we use all the time. But again, you have to walk before you run. The biggest thing, though, Adam and Paul, is you've got to take risks with yourself. I think nobody who's been an entrepreneur in life, whether it be optometry, business, medicine, etc., has been successful without taking risks. Some of the things I've bought have not worked out. Most of the things have worked out. But unless you put your foot in the water, you're never going to experience any success. If you're going to say, well, I can't afford that piece of equipment, one of the criteria I always had at the very beginning, which I've somewhat changed now, is if I'm going to buy something, I wanted to calculate my return on investment. So, for example, a fundus camera, a regular fundus camera. I'm not talking about the various wide field ones that exist today, the inferior ones to the ZEISS as well as the ZEISS. When you buy a fundus camera, you're going to find a certain amount of pathology by looking in the eye, and then you'll take a photo to document it. It could be a benign nevus. It could be a glaucoma patient. It could be various other things. It could be just simply somebody with a hypertensive retinopathy where you want to document the nicking and banking so that next time when they come in, you could communicate to the PCP that it's changed or not changed. So that equipment will pay for itself because the reimbursement is quite good and the cost is very, very low.
Well, but Steve, how basically one question a novice is going to say, well, that's great. We're spending this money for equipment. How do you bill Medicare and health plans for using this equipment? What happens?
Well, we're going to do a screening photo on everybody, which is a low resolution photo. But then during the examination, most patients are dilated. If we start seeing pathology or if the photo shows it, we'll do more high resolution. Medicare's reimbursements are the same for everybody throughout the country, whether it be an OD or an ophthalmologist. So you simply bill them for the pathology that you're seeing, whether it be they're a glaucoma suspect, optic nerve cupping, they have some macular drusen, they have other things happening in the fundus. Diabetics very, very often have slight hemorrhaging or changes. with some new technology that I'm hoping to get also, that the angiography of the OCT will pick up pathologies even more. So really, you have to. That's a whole other aspect. You have to know your coding and billing, and that's a whole other part of medical care, eye care in general that we've gotten quite good at. And sometimes we'll be doing tests just because for the good of mankind. For example, Medicare has silly rules where you can't do an OCT of the nerve and take a picture of the nerve the same day and bill for both. They only pay for one. Well, we do both tests because if I want to do a comprehensive examination, and I'll just that second test will be pro bono for the patient because I know, or we could submit it and we'll get paid for only one test. So the answer to your question really is that they all have various fees, some better than others. I find in my area, whether it be the big companies like Horizon, United Healthcare, Aetna, they're all pretty fairly paying in terms of the extra testing, as long as the staff knows how to code the various tests, and they do. The doctors pretty much do all the work in the room, but they know how to put the modifiers in, et cetera, and that's not too complex. You had two fellows who wrote a book on ODwire that I bought. Their name escapes me now. Tom, I believe, was his first name, and that helped a great deal. But you just keep up the coding. You keep on listening to lectures from the gurus, whether they be McGreal, Rumpakis, et cetera, and they always have information. But get into the insurances first, and I think it's still relatively easy. In most areas, you can get into most of the insurances, and they pay fairly well.
Right.
The other aspect, which is the 800-pound gorilla, is a fair percentage of patients do come from various vision care plans. We don't take the low-end ones, but I won't mention any names. But the ones that are that we do accept, very, very often we find pathology in these patients. It's actually a gateway to our office. They see how good we are, and maybe at the first visit, maybe we have to have them back because we're finding certain things, but suddenly a vision care patient who maybe was only in there for a fraction, suddenly you notice a problem, and it could be something simple like an anterior segment eye disease like dry eye or blepharitis, or it could be something more serious like a problem in the macula, a problem in the retina, lattice degeneration, whatever it might be, but you're having them back, you're doing a workup. One thing that I'll say, doctors are afraid to explain to the patient that it's going to be billed to their medical insurance. Mm-hmm. We actually don't even broach the subject. We just do it. A lot of people in this day and age have high deductibles, and they know why I'm doing the test. And let's say, for example, I do a glaucoma workup, and we bill out $500, and it goes to their it is covered, but it goes to the deductible. Well, it's not. Would I still have done those tests? Sure. Should the patient still have those tests? Yes. And does the patient have any problem paying for that? We didn't mention that. We mentioned we're billing into their medical insurance. Most people nowadays know they have deductibles, and we have very, very few people with pushback on it, just simply because they know they have to have these tests, and some of them truly have a major medical condition.
So what you're saying?
Be afraid.
What you're saying, it's not their fault that they have a deductible. It shouldn't be the optometrist feeling guilty. I mean, you have to do your job, and they have to blame their insurance company for the deductible, not you.
Correct. As you know, me personally, my wife broke her arm last year, and she wound up with a $4,000 bill when we had a $5,000 deductible. What did we do? We paid it. She had to have the surgery. It is what it is.
Right.
Now, some people you'll get very rare, maybe I would say 1 in 100, and you'll explain to them, and they eventually pay, and they understand that if they go to another practice, let me just refresh here. If they go to another practice, they're going to wind up with the same issues. So, as if the person did the right care, that is.
Sure.
Let me just open things up here again. So now, in terms of scheduling, this is what I've instituted in my office, and it's part of the business where you can see people in the most efficient manner. The way of doing it is by when you make the appointment for the patient, most of our patients are pre-appointed because they have known conditions, and new patients, when they fill out a form, they fill out it online, and we see they are a person with macular degeneration, diabetes, glaucoma. We'll actually say, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody's going to have a full glaucoma workup. They're scheduled to see me at 11 o'clock. They're told their appointment, though, is 10:15. So we have 45 minutes to do the complete workup, and they get in my room pretty much almost right on the dot of 11 o'clock. Well, let's say somebody calls up and they have a red eye, mucopurulent discharge, etc. Their 10 o'clock appointment is 10 o'clock. They go right into the room because they don't need any pre-testing. By doing it that way, we don't have 2 or 3 people entering the room at the same time. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you offset their examination, and with the newer EHR, let's say, advantages. I won't mention various companies, but there's 3 or 4. There's Nexus Prime, there's Demand Force, Solution Reach. They all have that ability to offset where the patient gets the notification, and it runs very, very smoothly because you don't have people entering the room at the same time. Before I started my practice, I was going into practice with somebody else, and after 6 months, I realized that it wasn't going to work out. He didn't want to do it that way. Tell the person it's 10 o'clock. And then everybody came into the room, and 3 people were coming into the room at the same time. So the staff has to be really organized, and they know that. Because we're scheduled pretty much a month in advance, all 3 of us, we'll go through our schedule and see, let's say, 4 or 5 days in advance. Oh, this person needs a 24-2. This person needs a 10-2. This person needs an OCT. This person needs a cell count. So we'll actually call the patient and say, instead of coming at 9:30, could you come at 9:15? And they appreciate that. And the biggest thing is you've gone to doctor's offices and you sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes to an hour, and they put you in a little room, a 10-by-10 room, and then you wait another 15 minutes for the nurse to come and take your blood pressure, then another 10 minutes for the doctor to come in to finally examine you. Nobody waits in our office. It's very rare that somebody's waiting because we try to keep things on schedule.
Well, Steve, I got a question for you. So you're doing this
Sure.
offset schedule. It's almost like you're scheduling your assistants in addition to scheduling yourself.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Do the EHR packages accommodate for that? Can you actually schedule, like have an entry, a line item for assistant time or for equipment time?
Yes, you could do it that way. We choose not to. We could have a separate column where the technicians have their schedule for the patient that I'm going to see, but we simply if I click on the patient's schedule, let's say I have a patient in my schedule at 11 o'clock. It'll say they're coming at 10:30, let's say, for pre-testing. And the pre-testing has already been designed for that patient. Now, let's take what you would do to develop medical practice for the new patient coming to your office. Let's say it's an adult, 40 years old, or something like that, nice simple case. We'll do that, as I said, the screening field, the retinal photo, the automatic keratometry, and puff tonometry. And we'll encourage them to have the wide field camera test, which is an extra few dollars. I mentioned we also had something called the MPOD, Macular Pigment Ocular Densitometer, which measures the amount of pigment in the central macula. And we found that, again, presenting an extra fee for that was just getting to be too much for the patients and too much time for the staff to present. And we weren't getting much data out of it. So now we do that test. You can't bill it because it doesn't have a code for insurance. So we do it for the good of mankind, but we still explain it to them. And then we'll also recommend certain nutraceuticals that we carry in the office that we think go over and above what the ARADS-2 studies do. So it goes from all areas. There's many ways of making income in your office that also is to the benefit of the patients. And what people visit our office all the time, and they're wowed by the various systems we have for it. As well as
so the answer is you need a well-trained traffic cop to really monitor the patients coming in. One of the issues you didn't bring up, however, is if you have a senior practice, many of the older folks come in early. They come in, they give themselves an extra half hour, and so the room is packed with people that come in early appointments. So you have to use very good judgment to let these people know that their appointment is a half hour later, so they're going to sit around for a while because they got there too soon.
Yeah, that's a problem we haven't solved. Now, let's say I start work at 9 o'clock. I get into office at 7 o'clock to do a lot of report writing as well as make sure the schedule is proper, etc. There's been times where a person's waiting at the door at 7 o'clock. So, I mean, I'll explain to them your appointment, as you know, is 9 o'clock, and they know that, but they're kind of used to getting there. We have a TV set in the waiting room as well as various other things that they can accomplish. And sometimes my staff can do the pre-testing and make it seem like they're being seen. Then they do have to wait, but that 99 times out of 100. So that's a problem that's inherent in the old age population.
Right.
You're right.
So,
If I ran an early bird special, it would be even worse. But we don't do that.
So yeah. So Steve, we've been talking, mostly about practice billing, but I want to switch gears because now, we this is a ZEISS conference, right? So
yes.
And we've been talking a lot about their equipment over the past couple of days. You mentioned Forum as well. It might be something you want to look at. So I'm curious now. You've now sat through this for 2 days. What are you thinking about in terms of ZEISS equipment? What do you have, and what are you thinking about?
Well, we have an older OCT. It's high resolution, but it's starting to have kinks in it, and it's not from ZEISS. And it makes so much sense to purchase that first, and perhaps add the angiography module at the beginning, or it may be down the road, because as you know, it's modular. You can just add it on. They just turn on the software. It makes so much sense to my office because we already have the Humphrey HFA 3. That's an amazing device, by the way. They didn't go into it as much as they should. When a person has the visual field tested, there's some liquid lens that senses your prescriptions. You don't have to put trial lenses in the instrument. You don't have to put glasses on or contact lenses on. It automatically has at least close to the prescription, so the field comes out very valid. But since I have that already, and that now integrates easily with the ZEISS OCT, that would be the first thing I would consider. And I'm not talking about the lower-end one. I'm talking about the 500 series one. And we'd have to see whether the angiography, that again, at this point, it won't be a separate billing, but I could see a great deal of goodness with it, where you're going to pick up early diabetics or diabetics, you're going to pick up some maculopathy. And interestingly enough, that instrument's not going, you're probably not going to send the person to the retinal specialist unless you see a subretinal net. You're probably just going to see the beginning macular aneurysms, but you'll send a letter to the PCP that, hey, this guy's A1C might not be appropriate for him because we're starting to see retinopathy. And as you well know, we'll explain to the patient, whatever is happening in the eye is probably happening in the heart, kidneys, or peripheral neuropathies could develop. And those are the patients you get back from the endocrinologist because they're appreciative that you found something so early in the game. So getting back to the ZEISS equipment, that first one will be first on my list. And actually on Monday morning, I'll be talking to my partner about it before making the plunge. Athos, who's our sales rep, is very aggressive, and he's been trying to get me to get it. But now that I see what it's all about more, it's something that's probably number 1, 2, and 3 on our list. The second,
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, too. You mentioned the HD 5000, as your OCT unit, and you already have the HFA 3. It was fun watching the Forum software this morning tie those two pieces together. And I don't know with your existing platform right now that you have, if you just get static images, or do you have anything like that with Forum where you can actually watch things sort of as they evolve?
The answer is we have static, but I wrote an article on integration of optometry about 4 or 5 years ago, and one of the things that I came up with was that the first term, the DICOM imaging. So all of them are DICOM images. So from what I hear from the expert at ZEISS, they all can be integrated into Forum. So even my old retinal camera or my wide field newer retinal camera, they're all DICOM images, so they can be integrated together, and that's where Forum will come in. The one thing I love is that you can manipulate the images still, and it still goes into the EHR. You have to realize when it goes into the EHR directly as a PDF, you can't manipulate it. You can't do anything to it like expand it, put different filters on, but with the Forum you can. So that's part of what we're considering, especially with the OCT and the Humphrey Visual Field Analyzer being from the same company. The second piece of equipment, which is a no-brainer, but as you have stated in the past, I made a big investment into another system, which we're about a year away from paying off. So it would make no sense to incorporate that at this time. But about a year down the road, the ultra-wide field camera is not on our wish list. It's something that we're going to get. The resolution is much better. The flexibility is much better. The whole system, again, will be integrated into the Forum platform that would be part of the OCT, the visual field analyzer, and probably some other pieces of equipment that I have. So those are my two very, very high on my wish list, one of them being probably immediate and one of them being a little bit down the road.
Right. A practical question. How do you make the best use of your assistants? Do you have one assistant that's highly trained on a specific instrument, or does your assistant, are they trained to use all the equipment? And are the equipment all in one room, or are they spread out around the office?
Great question. We built our office in a modular fashion in the pre-screening areas, so there's various rooms that various things have to be done. For example, visual field testing should be done in dark illumination. The visual evoked potential and ERGs have to be done in a dark room. So we have various little rooms for certain tests, and certain are wide out in the open, like the OCT, the wide field camera, etc. To answer your question, because we have a large staff and people take vacations and people are sick and various things happen, everybody's trained in every instrument. And pretty much my whole staff that we have, counting now, 5 or 6 pre-testers who all can work all the instruments equally well. And I mean, like you pointed out, what I said yesterday, equally well and far better than I can, because they do it all day, every day. And they're great. They know how to explain it. And they don't just do the test. In other words, they explain, we're doing this test because the doctors want to see this, this, and this, and this. And I don't want them to use a script. I want them to use their own language. They're all intelligent people. But they're all trained to use all the pieces of equipment just because of how things change. We have our office manager is out now sick, and hopefully she'll be back in the next week or so. And so, yes, you have to be trained in everything. We don't believe in cross-training them in the other side. So anybody who's a technician who might be able to help at the front desk, etc., won't be in the optical. They won't be picking out glasses. They are trained in contact lenses also as far as instruction. And I also have never, I heard you talking a little bit a while back, I've never, ever did an instruction of contact lens, instruction of and removal of them. As well as putting lenses on. So we're in the same, that hasn't changed in 30 or 40 years.
Right. Okay, so now we have ODs that are hot to buy. They're convinced. What's the best way to fund a purchase? This is big bucks we're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
I mean, if they have money put aside and could fund it that way, great for them, but most of them don't. So they're going to have to either take a loan out from the bank, which is usually not the case. There's various leasing companies. We have a relationship with 2 or 3 of them, and we'll go back and forth who's giving us the best deal. For a while, the interest rates were so low that the companies were giving us, some of them being 0% interest because they just wanted to move the equipment, that it was fairly easy. So we lease pretty much every single piece of equipment we had. But the lease is really a purchase. It's not like a car lease where you still owe $25,000 if you leased a Mercedes at the end or something like that. You own it with $1. And so really we're buying the piece of equipment. As I pointed out yesterday, it works out that if you're doing, most people do a 5-year lease. You can do less, you can do more. Like for certain small pieces of equipment, like a topographer that might cost $15,000, according to a topographer, we might do it for 3 years because the monthly payments aren't that great. But most of these pieces of equipment, I'll restate what I said yesterday, with the way you can depreciate them. Of the 5 years, the first 2 years are free just because of the tax savings of buying the equipment. I know that's a concept that doctors don't understand, but if you run it by your CPA or your accountant or your business advisor, you'll find that. So leasing, the leasing companies work very well with all the major manufacturers. ZEISS, I know does, because we just literally a year ago leased the visual field, the HFA, for somebody. And I think we got a fair deal. It pays for itself in spades because we do so many visual fields, and the stats on it are just amazing. They were talking about the forum where you can see everything at once. Well, now when a person comes in for their 6th visual field, they've been my patient for probably 5 visual fields now because how long we have the equipment. I see all the visual fields. I see them side by side. I see the progression. I see the statistical progression analysis that ZEISS provides, which is second to none. And I know what to do with that patient, whether it be increase their medications if it's a glaucoma patient, maybe send them out for surgery. There's so many new surgeries nowadays. But I think leasing is the way of going in my particular case because basically you're paying 65% of what the cost is, and most of these pieces of instrument you'll wind up making far more money in the billing to medical insurance, or, for example, the wide field camera would be something that I would actually charge the patient a certain nominal fee, something like $39 to do that test. And my staff will explain, we don't take the approach of we're doing this in lieu of dilation. As you've pointed out, you can do it without a dilated fundus, and you get a very nice picture. But if somebody says, gee, I want to do it instead of being dilated today, we'll say, okay, fine. But if we do see things or we suspect things, we're going to have you back and dilate you and do the regular analysis. So the answer is leasing and just establish a good relationship with leasing companies, and literally within one day we get approved. We pay our bills. That helps get approved.
Good advice. Anything else? We're just about out of time. Anything you want to share that we haven't reviewed? We covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, just that my first point should be my last point. Don't start a medical eye practice. Just do your job. In other words, every patient that comes in is somebody you should be doing certain tests on, like a simple slit lamp examination. Everybody I put, for example, fluorescein in their eye. It takes 5 seconds to do. So if you're doing just what you should be doing at a comprehensive examination, you're going to be picking up pathology. And don't be afraid to communicate to your patient base. That I should say. Everything you do, your patient should know about. There's various platforms. We use something called Nexus Prime, where we can get information out to the whole database of our patients for free. They get an email PDF on a new piece of equipment, on something that we did, maybe a famous case, etc. So just keep on plugging forward, and the biggest thing is treat people as if they have something wrong until proven otherwise. If you see a diabetic, if you see an older person, they're going to have some pathology of some sort. If they don't look at the lids, if they don't look at the cornea, if they don't stain it, they're not going to see these problems. And when you don't see them, you don't think they have them. And then there's various avenues of helping these people. One of the things you said, for example, I know I'm going off in a tangent, was the amniotic membranes. I took up amniotic membranes about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a big boon to our practice. And some of the corneal specialists are proud that we're right next to them, and they actually will send us a patient occasionally to put the membranes on because they're too busy or they know it's our patient. So just my biggest advice is don't start a medical practice. Do your job, and it will become a medical practice.
And that is a great note to end on.
Right, absolutely, Steve. Thanks for your time, and you're an inspiration to many, many practitioners.
Yep.
And remember, you can be in optometry and be very, very successful, be financially stable, and be able to maybe retire at my I'm going to be 29, I think, and, in dog years.
Right.
And you're correct. Keep up with everything also. If it's not so hard to keep up, it's easy to keep your head in the sand. It's hard to keep up, but it doesn't take that much effort.
Yep. All right. Well, Steve, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Let us know if we can do anything as you peruse and help people out, and we'll be here.
Great.
Okay.
I'll be here also.
Talk
Have
to
a
you
nice
soon.
rest of the day,
Thanks,
guys.
Steve. Catch you
Bye
later.
now. Well, that was interesting and informative.
Yep. Yeah. It's always great talking to Steve.
I hope the people watching and listening were taking notes.
Yep. And we'll post this up, of course, on the site when all is said and done. And again, for people at the conference, still remember, specials are going on. You got to rush in and get them. We're getting towards the end here, aren't we? We have one more interview to do, I guess, in a couple minutes with Dr. Eric Schmidt and all about glaucoma. But otherwise, the conference, a lot of the lectures have already been done. I guess Samantha's lectures on forum are going on.
Right, and Dr. Schmidt's lecture is over now.
Over, yep. So, yeah, so Dr. Schmidt, I can just put this up to show everyone. He gave us a lecture on glaucoma. There we go. And I guess we'll get him on the phone. Hopefully he's available. Hopefully that's his number.
I hope that's right.
I'm going to double check you actually before we do this. So, meanwhile, everyone take a look at the specials while I get us going here. Let me just make sure that's the right number.
Yeah, as I said before, yesterday we were concentrating much more on diabetes, which is a growth area of disease. And today we're talking a little more about glaucoma, which also, as we have an aging population, is increasing. And it's a type of thing where up until now, when optometrists saw glaucoma patients, they were all set to refer them out to an ophthalmologist or to a fellowship-trained glaucoma specialist. Today, with all the equipment that's available, every optometrist should be able to be managing glaucoma within their practice and only use the fellowship-trained glaucoma specialist if there are complications or they require glaucoma surgery. And by having the proper use of equipment that ZEISS offers, you should be able to do this in your practice. And hopefully, for those states where you still have a problem with treating glaucoma, your states will catch up. For those states where you have the ability to take care of glaucoma now, you've got to make use of the equipment that's available.
Absolutely. All right, so why don't I get Dr. Schmidt on the line here, see if we can find him.
Hello, this is Dr. Schmidt. I'm sorry I can't get to the phone right now, but please leave a message. And
Well,
That's not so good, is it?
well, yeah, so I guess we'll have to, we'll give him a couple minutes, then we'll try again. And in the meantime, what we can do,
Maybe you can text that number.
yeah, that went straight to his voicemail. That was relatively odd.
I
Let
checked
me-
his number. That's
Yeah, the
proper
number is right. We got that one right. So,
So we can talk a little bit more about the building practices. I mean, Steve Silberberg gave pure gold,
yep.
and the thing about building practices and building a medical practice, he says, well, you should be just taking care of patients, and the medical part will build itself. However, he started the conversation saying that the image of his patients, when they go into his office, is one of a medical practice. He doesn't have a stethoscope dangling around his neck. On the other hand, he does have his staff wearing scrubs. It looks like a medical practice. It doesn't look like a practice where the main goal is to fit eyeglasses.
That's true.
So that's important. And you cannot underestimate. You see, optometry was killed because up until 1987, optometry was not written into the Medicare law. That basically all people over 65 were able to get their eye care through an ophthalmologist with a minimum cost for refraction. So given a choice, why should a patient go to an optometrist and pay full freight when they could get eye care through Medicare with an ophthalmologist? That all changed in 1987, where optometrists could now bill Medicare for pathology.
Yep.
But it took a long time for optometrists to start building up the over 65 group. Now, of course, you're on an even level with ophthalmology as far as billing for Medicare, and it should be something that every optometrist should be looking for to build the over 65 group. And you can assume, rather than they're guilty until proven innocent, that you get someone over 65, it would be the exception not to find some sort of pathology which can be treated by an optometrist, whether it's dry eyes, whether it's the beginning of a retinal problem, whether it's cataract. There is something going on with the over 65 group. So you should be looking for these things, because if you don't look, you're not going to find.
Yep.
So you should be looking for it.
Meanwhile, I put up Steve's site just so everyone can see. He wasn't kidding. He does actually dress in scrubs.
And in New Jersey, they like to call themselves optometric physicians.
Right. So so you can see, the medical model was sort of built right into his practice just from the beginning, and it's just in the way that he presented himself.
Right.
One thing that surprised me on ODwire is that we've seen a number of doctors who don't bill Medicare, which to me,
Crazy.
in this day and age, I really don't understand.
Right.
But then again, we also saw on the site that we saw the statistics from 2017 that only about 400 ODs in the entire country billed Medicare for an amniotic membrane. And to me, that's just astounding.
Well, they're afraid. When I first went into practice, what helped me build a contact lens practice was that optometrists were afraid of the cornea. They felt that this cornea was a very, very fragile thing that they shouldn't get near, and they were afraid of fitting contact lenses. Hence, they were referring the patients out. Now, after a while, they get comfortable with it. So it is with glaucoma or with diabetes. You have to get comfortable doing it and know who to work with. What experts in medicine you can work with to build a practice.
Right.
And it's possible.
Yep. Okay, and you see the schedule up here right now. So Samantha's lecture is going on at this present moment about the ZEISS glaucoma workplace with Forum, and then finally the one with the retina workplace. So she'll be running over the two different workplaces in the Forum software. But we'll try Dr. Schmidt one more time now and see if we can get him again.
By the way, if you have any questions of us, you can just type something in and we're here to answer them.
That is true. We are here.
For another hour.
Yeah, we'll be here. So let's see if we can get Dr. Schmidt here. Fingers crossed.
It'll be interesting for you to give us feedback on ODwire, what you thought of the...
Hello, this is Dr. Schmidt. I'm sorry I can't get to the phone right now, but please leave a message.
Dead as a doornail.
Can you text him on that number?
I can try, although that went straight to voicemail, so I suspect his phone is
Give that a shot. Yeah, so what I was saying is that you ought to let ZEISS know what you thought of this meeting. They spent a lot of energy and money setting this thing up. This, to the best of my knowledge, is a first for a vendor. To be able to have a dedicated online type of program where you're getting speakers, you're getting booths, you're getting discounts, you're getting everything that you would have by having to travel to a state or regional meeting or a national meeting to get the same type of benefit. The only thing that you're not getting today, and we had this question, can I get credit for it? And the answer is no. You can't get credit for it because the speakers are being paid for by the vendors. So they're speaking for the vendor. They are speaking about a product, and we're talking about a product too here, which doesn't happen when you're doing a program for CE credit. So you're getting a lot of great information, but you can't get it for credit. So Sorry about that part.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges.
However, the good news is that we had a tremendous response to this, so they're getting a meeting size equal to a major meeting.
Yep. Yeah, so and again, if you'd like to give feedback to us or to ZEISS directly, that would be helpful, just so we can do what we can to try to make the program even better next time around. What's funny about some of the lectures that I'm looking at them right now, I almost wonder, looking at them, could we get COPE approval on them? And I don't see, at least in a couple of them that I've watched, I think we could. But again, in this sort of format, it's a very difficult thing to do.
Right.
Right. So, that's something that we'll have to talk about going forward to see if we can do it. ZEISS obviously is a totally different kettle of fish, because the vendors are separated out from the education side of things, so they're two completely separate tracks, and that's sort of what COPE requires.
Yeah, well, let's do a quick commercial for CEwire. on ZEISS's dime, as long as we have time.
There we go.
Next month,
Okay.
we're going to be offering the best of CEwire from 2017 and 2018. The speakers that got the largest approval rating will be coming back, and we took the best 14 hours, and we're going to offer that for a 2-month period. No vendors, no booths, just pure lectures. For those of you that need some extra credits before the end of the year,
Right.
you have 14 hours.
Yeah.
The best news is those that took the courses in 2018 will get it for free.
Right. So just to give you some background on how this happened, as you know, CEwire only runs for 3 months each year, right? Because it's 2 days live, and then we put the lectures on demand for 3 months. The reason for that requirement is that most of the speakers, and we try to get the best speakers we can for the program, right? We get all the nationally known names and some up-and-comers that you might not know. We get a mix. Many of those speakers don't want their materials sitting out online all year, and I completely understand it. They go around to various conferences and do the same lecture numerous times. So we struck a deal in the beginning. Was 3 months seemed reasonable in terms of the amount of time that they could hang out online. What we did, since people were clamoring for more credits, once May came around, obviously the lectures went dead. Some people do need some extra credits towards the end of the year. So what we did was we were able to go back to some of those speakers, ask, could we please put them back up there and run a mini conference just using a few of these credits for people who desperately need the extra, and that's what we did.
Right.
So again, it's costing us more money. We're paying the speakers again for doing this again, and paying for the tech again, and we're doing it all over again. But we feel like having that presence towards the end of the year is useful for a lot of people.
And it'll be done at a very modest cost. For those of you that didn't take it in 2018, it'll be at a very modest price per credit hour, much to the chagrin of many of the companies organizations that like to make a profit, a big profit from continuing education.
Right.
That's not our goal.
That's not our goal, and that's of course why we still donate the profits from the event to the I guess they call themselves the American Academy of Optometry Foundation now.
Yeah.
They used to be the AOF and VOSH. So, and again.
Okay, why don't we try him one more time, and
Yep,
then we'll put a movie on.
I think he's here. Let me go give him a shot. I think he just had his phone
we'll
off.
put a lecture on it to give him a chance to get here. Maybe he's so busy answering questions that he's tied up.
He's here. I just think his phone, for whatever reason, didn't answer, but I'll try one more time.
Hello.
Eric, it's Adam and Paul Farkas. How you doing?
Hi, how you doing?
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for sorry for the glitch. I thought it was at 1 o'clock.
Oh no worries. Yeah. So how did everything go? Your lecture, I guess, was just a little while ago, right?
Yeah, I just finished at 12. I thought it was good. It was. Mike and I, we thought we were doing a dry run when we recorded it, and they decided just to can it, or just to produce it. So from that end, it was really good, I think. So.
Excellent. And did you have any questions from anyone? Anything, any feedback so far?
Yeah. There was about I think 4 or 5 questions on the some of the clinical stuff we talked about, and how to incorporate the newer technology into existing technology, and if our strategies for, changing therapies has changed, if our strategies for the test, for changing test frequencies and stuff like that has changed because of the new technology.
Right. So I guess this is a good starting point to talk about that. The technology has evolved rapidly. It's certainly since his day.
Oh yeah.
It's sort of changed starkly. So can you get us up to date now in 2018? Sort of what's the best testing strategy for glaucoma?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I was saying on the lecture today that I often get asked, if I have to buy one instrument to test for glaucoma, what should it be? And the answer is you can't buy one. You really have to have all of them, because the testing is so specific and so unique between the OCTs or the visual fields and fundus photos and things like that they give you such specific information, and the more information that you have at your hands, the better your decision making process will be. But certainly when it comes to visual fields, I think that the move is to go to faster testing. Faster testing has lots of different advantages. One is that the patients won't gripe about it as much, and if the patients don't gripe about it, they'll do better at it.
Right.
And then if you can do faster testing that the patients don't completely disapprove of, you can do more testing. And I think that's really where the movement is headed, is to doing more frequent visual field testing. I think certainly I was brought up in this profession in the 80s and 90s, where you do one visual field test a year and you hope it's good, and if it isn't, you wait till next year to try to get a better one. And now in our practice, the protocol is for at least 124-2 yearly and at least 110-2 yearly, and we're moving to 3 or 4 visual field tests a year, because there's such inter-test unreliability. You want to be able to have reproducible, good, reliable tests. And so the more you do, the better, the more information you get, and the better the information becomes. So, having said that, our ability to get testing information at a quicker rate is really important, and that's where the CETA Faster technology that we talked about today from ZEISS came in. CETA Faster's cut down the testing time by a half compared to the CETA Standard, which is what a lot of people are still using. And the average test time on a CETA Standard is about 6 minutes. The average test time on a CETA Faster technology is about 2.5 minutes per eye. So think about that. You've just cut down by, you spent half the time getting the same amount of data without dumbing down the results at all. And so that has numerous advantages, not the least of which you'll be able to get more testing more often, more reliably, I think.
Right.
So that's kind of the big.
So you're saying to the older practitioners that the old tangent screen won't cut it anymore, right?
without a doubt, for sure. I mean, if you grew up like I did, in this profession in the 90s, then you're still stuck in the standard. I got a question today. So, if you don't have the CETA Faster, is the CETA Fast the quote better way to do it? And certainly, anything you can do to speed up the test without dumbing it down is really important. And again, the CETA Faster technology that we talked about today doesn't dumb down the test. It tests the same amount of data points, but it delivers the test points more quickly. So the interval between the spot presentations has been decreased. So you're testing the same amount of spots, but quicker. And then it also reduced some of the redundancies. The older test strategies would retest spots 3 or 4 times sometimes to make sure that the patient was paying attention. And this doesn't do that as much. It measures reliability a little bit differently than having to retest the same spot over and over and over. So without dumbing down the test, you're speeding it up, and that's certainly what we're finding is it's just a much more reliable result because of that. And so it's kind of it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, and from the patient's point of view, it's far less fatiguing.
Oh my goodness, for sure. And from the doctor-patient relationship, it's far less begging and pleading and kicking and screaming, for sure. You know, they still don't like to do the tests, but they will accept it a lot better than they typically had.
Right.
So how often should the visual field test be performed?
Well, you know, certainly for any glaucoma patient or any glaucoma suspect, you want to do 2 a year. And, you know, the old standard has been you cannot make a judgment upon visual field progression until you have had 3 reliable baseline tests. And so what Mike Shaglasian was saying today in the talk was their protocol now has become they want to get those first 3 tests within the first 6 months, if possible, because you've got to prove, you know, you've got to get your baseline. And then once the baseline is achieved, then you go to every 6 months or so, unless you need more information, and then you'd get it quicker. But certainly the movement is to get your baseline, you know, your 3 baseline tests within the first year, and then after that, twice a year.
Right. So, you know, we had the folks from ZEISS on before. We had Samantha on talking about Forum and using Forum to link together the various instruments, including the HFA3. And it sounds like you're an actual user of this in real living practice. So I'm curious, you're the first practitioner we've spoken to today who has it implemented. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works, you know, in the context of the instruments that you have?
Sure. So it's basically, Forum is basically a data gathering portal. So every time you do a visual field, you download it to the Forum, the Forum portal. Every time you do an OCT, you download it to the Forum portal. And I think it's important to understand that even though Forum is a ZEISS product, it will gather and gather the data for you, even if it's not a ZEISS instrument that you're using. So if you have a different type of OCT, for instance, a different brand of OCT, that information is still downloadable to that portal, and you can access it. And so every time you do a test, it gets downloaded to this Forum portal. And then when you want to take a look, you're about to go and examine a patient. You go to your Forum portal first, and you can access 50 different tests, all the different OCTs that you've done, or all the different visual fields. Or you can place the last 3 visual fields side by side. You can place the fundus photographs on the same screen. You could place the maybe guided progression analysis of the last 5 visual fields you've done. And so at a glance, you can see, hey, okay, there's the photos. That was what the photo looked like 4 years ago. It's what the photo looked like today. These are the last 3 visual fields. These are the last. This is the progression analysis of the last 5 OCTs. And at a glance, you can see, you know, what's been going on, kind of a history, the history of the patient's disease, without having to flip through a bunch of different screens, you know, go back and forth. Or you know, the old days of the eye institute, we used to roll out the thermal paper from the visual fields down the hallway and try to figure out progression from those grayscales. And so now you can just at clicks arrange the data any way you want it on a screen, and really make a much more a much quicker assertion of whether there's progression or stability or not. And you can kind of customize any of that presentation in any way you want to do it. If you want to just look at the last 5 fundus photos, you can just put those all up on the screen. So you can look at any of the test strategies in any manner that you want to do, really at a click. And it's what you want to do. You can change that for every patient that you're examining. And so it just streamlines your ability to look at the data. And I think that's really important, because another question you talk about is, well, how often should we repeat this stuff? Well, it's a matter of frequency, but it's also what you do with the information you gather. And so the Forum just allows you to really at a glance make a much ascertain whether there's need to change therapy or keep therapy or start therapy.
Right. I mean, it's the difference between, you know, flipping through some PDFs, which is identical to flipping through paper to try to figure out what's going on, right? Like in an old paper record, versus actually being able to dynamically play with the data to be able to see things in real
exactly.
time. I mean, that's the big difference, I would say.
So how can you
That's
really? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm in complete agreement with you. It's the same way when we went for it's a sea change when we went from paper to digital. Now we're taking all those digital images but putting them all on the same page, so we can just instead of scanning through screen by screen, it's all on one screen at your fingertips.
Right.
Great. So how can you tell if there's progression?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different ways. So for instance, the visual fields. We showed a case today where the guided progression analysis of a Humphrey visual field was stable for 5 years, but yet you look at the pattern standard deviation was showing a change. So is that progression or is that not? Well, based on the visual field, you can't really say because there's confounding data. So on the same screen, you look at the OCTs for the last 3 years, and you can see this particular instance, for instance, the average RNFL thickness showed no significant change, but if you look at the clock hour type of printout, or the clock hour section on that type of printout, at two different little clock hours, they were showing progression, significant progression at 2 clock hours, which probably went along with the pattern standard deviation change on the visual field. Yet it wasn't significant enough in the big picture to change the overall retinal nerve fiber layer average thickness, or to change the overall, or for the guided progression analysis to pick up change. So you have to look at all the different data, that each of the tests provides. There's not one way to look at. There's not a glaucoma checker. There's not an index that says it's progressing or not. But our ability to look at more data more frequently and in more detail is really going to help you pick up progression or not miss progression. That's for sure. So the answer to that question is, how do you determine progression? The answer is, I guess you just got to look, but you got to look in really much more detail than I think we're currently looking.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in fact, now that you make this case and thinking about forum and being able to have all that data at your fingertips to make a decision, you think about the way you did it in the old days. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, how much got missed?
Yeah, exactly. It's humbling. It really is.
Yeah.
There was a case when we first put this in. There was a case that I was convinced had been stable for years, but you look back and you put the fundus photos side by side. And sure enough, there's a notch that had developed that was subtle, and then you look at it in live and say, oh, there's a notch for sure. But It had shown up 2 years earlier, but we just never looked at it in the right way, I guess. And so by presenting that kind of historical data, on the screen, it's kind of a humbling experience. It's an eye-opener. It's forced me to really look. Because I don't want an instrument to be smarter than me, So it makes me look even in more detail than I had before.
Right. And just for folks who may be just reviewing this for the first time in a long time, what's the first field defects that you'll typically see when you're looking for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we're used to we were taught to look for arcuate defects or nasal steps, and by the time those develop, that's severe glaucoma. So for the visual field that we look at now, there's really 3 early defects that are often missed that just kind of signal, hey, this person probably needs treatment. And the first one is if you look at the glaucoma hemifield test, and on all the ZEISS strategies will give you a glaucoma hemifield test, and if that was within normal limits for years, and then it becomes borderline, let's say, in one eye or the other, if there's a change, the suggestion is you repeat that, and if it still comes back borderline or outside normal limits, that's considered an early global change, one of the first things to happen. And remember, glaucoma hemifield test is comparing superior to inferior hemispheres. And so if it picks it up, it's saying, yeah, there's a significant difference in the sensitivity between the two hemispheres. And so if that's a repeatable change,
that was within normal limits for years before, and now it's not. That's an early change. The second early change is that in that same box as the glaucoma hemifield test, there's a mean an MD, the mean defect or mean deviation value, and if that steadily decreases over time, if that goes from, the mean deviation is +2, and then it goes down to +1, and then it goes to -1.5, and then -2.6, or if there's a steady decrease in that number over 3-4 tests, that's telling you that, hey, the overall sensitivity of the nerve is less than it was when you started these tests, whether that's 6 months ago or 4 years ago. And so that steady change in the mean defect is significant as a indicator that the health of the nerve is not as good as it was when you started looking at it.
Right.
And so that's considered to be an early defect. And then the third early defect is we look for clusters, and I guess the definition of a cluster is 3 contiguous points that repeatedly show up as abnormal. And I don't mean that they have to be dark black in color, but if they're hatched at all, if they're not just completely white, if there's hatching at all in 3 contiguous points that again is repeatable, that's a early focal defect, and that focal defect is going to blossom into an arcuate scotoma or a germ type scotoma, rather quickly. And so those are the first 3, the earliest defects that we see. And when you see that, if you see any of those, I think really they need to be started on therapy, or if they're already being treated, they need to have additional IOP lowering.
Right.
I have a question, a little more practical. You have the equipment now, and you are a glaucoma specialist in a way that you know more than your peers. Are you getting referrals in from optometrists?
Well, yeah. The answer to that is yes. I am. And the answer for those that aren't is, well, you should. I mean, if you've got this equipment, you've separated yourself out as someone who knows what they're doing, someone who's up to date on the strategies of testing, up to date on the therapy, up to date on when to advance therapy. I sure hope your colleagues are realizing that. But one of the complaints I get from ODs out there who I know are smart people. They're treating glaucoma well. So I'm not getting any referrals from the ODs, and I respond to them by saying, well, first of all, do they know you welcome their referrals? Mm-hmm. And second of all, go to them and convince them or tell them that, hey, your referrals are just as safe with me as they are with Dr. General Ophthalmologists out there. And my interest is the same interest as yours, taking good care of your patients. If you get them, if you send them to me, I'm certainly not going to fit them with contacts. I'm certainly not going to give them their annual examination. I will do what exactly you want me to do as far as answering the glaucoma questions and co-manage them with you as you see fit. But they remain in charge, but you're just there to help them out. But if your colleagues don't know that you're willing to do that, then certainly they're not going to refer to you. So you can't be bashful to your colleagues about what you do and about asking for referrals.
Right. And on the other hand, you do probably work with fellowship-trained ophthalmologists that limit their practice to glaucoma. When do you start referring your problem cases to these fellowship-trained glaucoma experts in ophthalmology? Yeah,
so that's a really good question, I think. So everybody's comfort level is different, and so it's a hard question to answer. But I'll tell you, for me, when I think I've exhausted maximum medical therapy, and in most cases, maximum medical therapy for me is 2 bottles. And it doesn't matter what those bottles are, but studies show clearly that the more bottles you add, compliance decrease. For every bottle you add, compliance decreases by about 1/3. So more is not necessarily better. I think in glaucoma, less is more. So if they're on 2 bottles of drops and I think they need additional IOP lowering, I will at that point. I almost always send them out for surgery, and I don't mean SLT. I mean surgical procedures, and then also if they need if they're stuck around 18 with their pressure or so, let's say, and you need to get them to 12, and they're already being treated. It's really hard it's easy for medications to get an IOP from 35 to 18. But it's significantly harder to get them from 16 to 12. It just glaucoma drops just don't work well that way. So if you need those really low pressures, 12s, single digits, I really think surgical intervention is the best way for that, personally.
Great.
Great. All
Good
right.
answer.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for this. This has been fantastic, and I know we're going to be posting copies of this online on ODwire, and so I'm sure people are going to have questions for you.
Plenty of questions.
And
I'm
so
sure.
I'll make sure that if there are questions, I'll forward them on to you. I'll send you an email.
All right, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for your time.
Enjoy your Sunday, guys. Thanks.
You too. Bye. All right.
Okay, boy, learned a lot about glaucoma.
Yes, we did.
Absolutely. So
Wow.
there's no excuse why every optometrist that is allowed in their state to treat glaucoma is not treating glaucoma.
Yep.
It's something that's billable. It is something where you'll get patients back on a very routine basis, which is billable. So if you want to fill up those exam chairs, you don't want to do it with the patients that are not pathology patients. You want to get this medical optometry in there.
Right. Well, we're just about out of time here. If we're looking at the schedule, I just wanted to remind people discounts are still available. They have to run though.
Run in there.
Run in there, hurry. The discounts are still there. And even though we're at the end of our lecture schedule, so I'd like to thank ZEISS for going ahead and doing this. I thought this was a really fun couple of days, and I've learned an awful lot. I had no idea.
The exhibit hall is going to be open until 2 o'clock Eastern.
The exhibit hall will be open, and really the exhibit hall will stay open. The discounts, I can't tell you. I mean,
that's up to them.
Yeah, that's up to them, not us. But but the exhibit hall will stay open. The lectures will be available on demand for the next month as well. But I highly urge, if you want to get these discounts, go in there now. Say hi to somebody inside the ZEISS booth, and hopefully they can take care of you. So, yeah. So I think that's about it. So
okay, so we're going to put a show on for them?
Yeah, I think for the last few minutes here, instead of us talking away, we'll put on the show from yesterday if I can get it running. The diabetes show.
The diabetes show is very valuable.
It is valuable. It's scary, and you'll learn a lot.
It'll inspire us to eat better.
Yes, and maybe just go out and run some laps.
What are you having for lunch?
Yeah, nothing. Air. Yeah, it's a little bit terrifying listening to this, but anyway, thanks everyone for coming today and to the conference.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been fun. Again, this will all be up online, so hopefully we can see it on ODwire. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask.
Yeah, just ask away. We're on ODwire all of the time.
All the time.
24/7.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you online.
Welcome to the ZEISS virtual trade show. Our talk today is called The Diabetes Epidemic. How do we get ahead of it? A disclaimer, first of all, to let you know the people presenting today are reflecting their personal opinions and experiences and don't necessarily reflect the views of Carl Zeiss Meditech. Not all of the products or services being referenced today are approved or offered in every state for use at this time. So I'm honored to be presenting today with Aaron Leck and April Jasper. My name's Paul Chaus. I'm in practice in Tacoma, Washington, and I have a practice that emphasizes diabetes. Aaron Leck practices in Roseville, California, and he's clinical director and the CEO of Clearview Eye Care. Dr. Jasper practices at Advanced Eye Care Specialists in West Palm Beach, Florida. These are both really two super smart colleagues of ours, very technology savvy, and I'm really honored to have a chance to present with both Aaron and April today. So what is the current diabetes landscape? Let's kind of set this up for what the problem is as we currently know it. We really have a time bomb of diabetes that's not only about to go off, it's going off as we speak, with new cases increasing on a daily rate. So right now there's about 31 million Americans that have diabetes, and it's accounting for a lot of healthcare expenditures in the US. Of total healthcare dollars spent, diabetes accounts for 1 in 5. For Medicare recipients, it's 1 in $3 spent on diabetes. $322 billion were spent when this slide was made, which was 2016, on both pre-diabetes and diabetes. A new report came out last month in the journal Diabetes Care said that caring for diabetes alone in 2017 cost the US economy $327 billion. So that's essentially 2 Hurricane Katrinas every year accounted for by expenditures on diabetes. And the majority of that is going for medical care. And there's also about $70–80 billion in lost productivity. In addition, though, to these 30 million people that have diabetes, there's about 86 million that have a disease called pre-diabetes. The majority of these folks will go on and develop diabetes if something isn't done to intervene. So it's really a public health catastrophe. And in the US, we're actually doing better than a lot of other parts of the world, which I'll talk about in a moment. So these are 2017 diabetes statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They say 30.3 million Americans had diabetes, but about 7 million of those folks were undiagnosed. In addition, they say 84 million people have pre-diabetes. Most people think it's above 100 million now if you talk to kind of epidemiological experts in diabetes. But nonetheless, if you pool these two groups together, we're talking a significant number of Americans. 1.4 million Americans right now are legally blind from an ocular complication of diabetes. And it's typically diabetic macular edema or proliferative diabetic retinopathy. About 8 million total Americans have some degree of diabetic retinopathy. Worldwide, 1 billion people are expected to have diabetes by the year 2050. Right now, it's at about 600 million. So that's really an astounding number. The fastest rates of diabetes prevalence are growing in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, and probably because they've imported not only our goods, but also our Western lifestyle, which includes a diet that is too high in calories, too high in carbohydrates, loss of physical activity, more sedentary lifestyles, all things that increase the risk of developing especially type 2 diabetes. So we know that diabetic retinopathy specifically, that rates are higher in certain populations, including people of color, African Americans, Latino and Native Americans, and people from the Pacific Island groups are much more likely to develop diabetes. Macular edema, as it turns out, diabetic macular edema is the biggest cause of vision loss in diabetes, much more common than is proliferative disease, but often these two entities go hand in hand. We know based on large, well-done studies looking at how do you prevent diabetic retinopathy and severe vision loss, that if patients can improve their metabolic control, including blood sugar, blood pressure and to a lesser extent blood lipids, that will lower the risk of developing diabetic retinopathy and for retinopathy getting worse and causing vision loss. Probably the most important risk factor is disease duration. How long you've had diabetes determines whether or not you're more or less likely to have diabetic retinopathy. Most experts say that everybody eventually gets diabetic retinopathy if they have diabetes. It's not a matter of if, but when it will happen. And we really, we have new ways of looking at the retina now that show us that a lot of people that heretofore wouldn't have been diagnosed as having diabetic retinopathy actually have retinopathy here and now today. And we'll talk more about that as we move through the cases. It's important to realize there's really no level of average blood glucose, that is hemoglobin A1C, that is totally protective against diabetic retinopathy. And we all need to educate our patients about prevention, but there is no level below which retinopathy does not occur. So that's an important point. That's why these folks need to be followed up on a regular basis. So DR and DME in the US, there's about 8 million people, which is 27% of people with diabetes in the United States have some degree of diabetic retinopathy. About 6 million are already diagnosed, but that means 2 million are not yet diagnosed. So there's a large pool of patients out there walking around, have not been identified as having diabetic retinopathy. And when they're not identified, they're less likely to go in for routine care, less likely to have early intervention that prevents vision loss. Specifically around diabetic macular edema, a little more than 2 million have some degree of macular edema, and 800,000 are not yet diagnosed. And even those diagnosed, a fair number are not receiving treatment. So this is really an area where optometrists can step up to the plate and help our patients with DME get referred in for appropriate treatment in a more timely fashion. This is an international study from Yao that said that worldwide, about 10% of all diabetes patients have sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. So that's defined as either proliferative diabetic retinopathy or center-involved diabetic macular edema. That is, the center of the macula is thickened and patients are at imminent risk of losing vision. So that's worldwide, it's about 10%. In the US, there's not really hard data on this, but if you look at the numbers, it's somewhere between 5 and 6%. So a little better in the United States overall. The problem really of diabetes, I think, is worse than I've already alluded to, because if you look at NHANES data, that's the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, that diabetes prevalence in adults over age 18 was somewhere between 12 and 14%. And that's 6 years ago in 2012. At the same time, they found out that about 38% of all US adults have prediabetes. This condition where blood glucose levels are elevated, but they haven't quite crossed the quantitative threshold for being labeled as having diabetes. But if you add these two groups together, those with prediabetes and those with diabetes, it turns out that's more than 50% of all US adults. So that's pretty scary. And when you get to older ages, above age 65, the numbers go up. It's about 83% of people over 65 have diabetes or prediabetes. So you can't say you haven't seen a patient today with either diabetes or prediabetes. If you look to your left or look to your right, there's probably someone, if it's not you, that either has diabetes or prediabetes. It's something we're going to be seeing a lot more of. So 84 plus million Americans have prediabetes. An interesting thing to know is that upwards of 10% of these patients have ophthalmoscopic signs of diabetic retinopathy. So I kind of asked this rhetorical question. If they've got microaneurysms, hemorrhages, heart exudates, and they've got prediabetes, do they have pre-diabetic retinopathy? Obviously not. They've got diabetic retinopathy that hasn't been diagnosed yet. And there's a number of reasons for that, which include we're not necessarily doing the most accurate or high yield tests for diagnosing diabetes early on. And that's why about 1 in 5 newly diagnosed type 2 patients already have some degree of diabetic retinopathy. And that's using the old standards, looking with a Volk lens, looking, with a binocular indirect ophthalmoscope, not even using the great technologies we're going to be talking about today, which will yield a much higher number of patients that already have some degree of retinopathy. It's important to know, one of the things about early diagnosis is, first of all, we're not doing a good job of it because we're looking only at blood sugar and specifically fasting blood sugar. That's what the average primary care physician does. And it's a great test if somebody definitively has diabetes for a while, but it doesn't pick up on the disease early. We know by the time the average person with type 2 diabetes gets diagnosed that more than half of their beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin are not working anymore. They're being burned out, essentially. The pancreas goes into overdrive, and so the beta cells die out. And that the mean duration of diabetes at diagnosis is about 6.2 years. And that's based both on the prevalence of retinopathy and the amount of beta cell destruction at the time of diagnosis. The point here really is that if you detect any lesions that are consistent with diabetic retinopathy, we as eye care providers can help yield an earlier diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And that hopefully will lead to earlier intervention and better outcomes long term. Because remember, diabetic retinopathy doesn't occur in isolation. It goes hand in hand with dramatically increased risk of cardiovascular disease and renal disease and neurological dysfunction as a result of diabetes. 1 in 10 patients gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes for the first time in the emergency room after they've had a heart attack. And that's pretty sad. So I've talked to a lot of patients that say, I just found out I have diabetes in the hospital. I had a heart attack and they told me my blood sugar was crazy high. Well, a lot of these patients have been living with the condition for years. It hasn't been diagnosed early on. That's the problem. So these are kind of classic lesions, right, that we've all been trained and retrained to detect in our patients. And we can see, obvious, hard exudates on the upper left and somebody with proliferative retinopathy on the upper right, and then more severe exudates on the lower right. And then, of course, with optical coherence tomography, especially SDOCT, we have the ability to detect exquisitely small amounts of macular edema now. And these tools are really wonderful. But I want us to know that diabetic retinopathy is not just this stuff. Diabetic retinopathy also includes things like the following. So here's a patient, if you look at the patient, with typical examination techniques with a fundus lens or a direct ophthalmoscope or even a conventional retinal camera, there's very little retinopathy in the central 45 degrees. If you go outside the central 45 degrees, though, we see a whole lot of action going on. And this is what the new research is saying, is that people that have a lot of peripheral retinopathy are dramatically more likely to develop severe sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy and may need intervention earlier on than they would have otherwise. If you don't look at the peripheral retina, you're not going to see this stuff. So that's one example of where excellent technology can help us do a better job. You can throw a BIO on, but I would venture to say a lot of us, when we're looking at our diabetic patients, we're not looking as sensitively at the peripheral retina. We're spending more time on where we think the action is, which is the posterior pole. And granted, that's really important. That's where vision occurs. But what you're seeing in the periphery is a harbinger of what is going to happen in the posterior pole in the future. So it's really important to look. Here's another example of a new technology we're going to be talking about today that shows a patient that has very little diabetic retinopathy on clinical exam, maybe a couple of microaneurysms, but the patient's best corrected vision is down. There's no cataract. This is a young patient. Our colleague Jay Haney shared this with me. And so why does this patient have reduced vision? You wouldn't really know unless you did this particular test, which is an OCT angiography test. And it shows this patient has enlargement of the foveal avascular zone and dramatic capillary dropout. There's nothing that really can be done for this patient in terms of clinical intervention right now. We can try to prevent progression of the disease, but there's nothing that's going to restore this patient's vision. So OCTA is an exquisite way to let us see these kinds of manifestations of diabetes. And the estimate is, based on fluorescein angiography, somewhere between 8 and 10% of all people with diabetic retinopathy also have foveal ischemia. So it's really the ugly stepsister of diabetic retinopathy that we don't spend as much time talking about, especially in optometry, because we're not typically doing fluorescein angiography. So now we're going to have Dr. Leck present some interesting, eye-opening information about the economics of diabetes care. Aaron?
Well, Paul, thank you so much for that introduction and giving us such a wealth of information. You are always such a spout of information, at least for me, and I know for April, when I look to an expert on diabetes in this field, and in particular in eye care, but especially as it pertains to how we affect many other specialties and integrate with the larger healthcare community, you are definitely probably the best and most sought after resource. So thank you again for that. To get down to some brass tacks here, I guess we're going to speak a little bit more about some of the elements around the economics of diabetics. And this isn't to say just directly diabetes and its economics in our practice, but maybe the way in which that drop in the pond, so to speak, the ripple effects across our practices and what those may look like. But I want to start off with, I think, the first acknowledgement, and that is that when we add technology to the care of the diabetic patient, that the equation changes. No longer does 1 + 1 = 2. It might equal 4, it might equal 3, but it equals some other number that's larger than itself. So the first thing that I want to make sure we leave the audience with today is that investing in technology and continuing to have a plan and pathway in your practices to invest in technology is only going to benefit patients who have diabetes and are in your practices, as well as the wealth of patients that are in your practices that don't have these conditions. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, as we invested from a practice standpoint on our side, what I wanted to share with you was what some of those metrics look like, because it's easy to get esoteric and talk about something like 1 + 1 = 3, and now we're in a theoretical discussion. But when we really look at things, what happens across a practice? So for us, we manage a lot of cataract patients, and typically out there in the industry, you'll see in cataract conversion rates somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 25 to 30%. Premium IOLs and premium procedures is a typical number that you'll find in a practice that is doing really well at converting. We found that with the implementation of technology, and remind you, a lot of these patients with diabetes are early cataract patients, that number sits at 130% across our patient base. Those types of numbers don't happen because you just kind of throw caution to the wind and tell somebody they have a cataract and it's now time to go get that procedure done. But you need the technology to demonstrate things to patients so that they understand what their options are. In addition to that, we found that the engagement with our patients with diabetes in practice has really increased our total medical revenues to the tune of about $300 per average medical revenue on a patient per year. That's not saying that we're doing only $300 in collections on a patient with diabetes per year, but we're seeing these increases across the entire spectrum by introducing and then implementing and utilizing medical technologies. We're also seeing with patients in terms of the care and active care of diabetes about 2.5 average number of visits per year that we're seeing these patients in. And that number translates well, right? If we're looking at a number like $300 per average medical revenue on patient and a 2.5 number in terms of return visits, these numbers start to make a little bit more sense. But what happens to the patients when it comes to things like recall? There's all sorts of systems out there for recall and ways to get really good at this. You know, what we've found is that when patients are engaged in their healthcare, they show up. And in our case, in our practice, it's about 80% of those patients return yearly for their diabetic eye exam. I would challenge you to find a recall system that's out there in industry that is able to provide that sort of return. Patients here, because of the engagement with the technology, they see and understand their condition better, and they are coming back and they're taking our recommendations. And where else does that spill over into? Well, the biggest rave right now in our field, at least in optometry and eye care, is dry eye and dry eye disease. 54% of these patients suffer from dry eye. We know that that's a well-founded fact. If you're looking to grow a set of patients like that in your practice, why wouldn't you continue to engage more deeply, invest in the technology of capturing the imagination of these patients, and then engage them in other ways where they have demonstrated needs? Now, out there, the other piece that I think at least we find in our practice is how do you balanced managed care and vision care plans versus medical. If you look at any of the discussions across ODwire in particular, this topic is it could probably weave its way into just about any thread. And I think that's unique. It's something to really consider because the vision plan patient is one of those patients that crosses over from a diabetes standpoint, but the vision plan patient is a patient that routinely within practice can be, at least the way in which the vision plans will have us believe is that they bring patients into our practice. What we see when we engage a patient with diabetes, that on a 2-to-1 ratio, they out-refer the patients into our practice, additional patients. These aren't just patients who struggle with diabetes, but these are patients of all walks of life. And so I think it's important to understand that when we engage in caring for patients who need this care, that they refer patients into us, they return more often. And finally, what does that mean for us? Well, the big number across our practice has been about $150,000 a year is the increase in revenue per full-time equivalent doctor that we've seen by deeply engaging in technology, employing these tools, and working with patients much more closely to help them understand their care and implement new technologies in those spheres. So that's the economics of diabetes, hopefully from a boots on the ground level. And in our practice, that's a 4-doctor group practice that is stationed in the middle of California, where most people would tell you that you can't do much medical care. I think that those numbers show something very different. So let's talk then about the technology and what does it mean to bring in technology? What does industry-leading technology look like, and why should you consider it? In terms of industry-leading technology, one of the first pieces that's always on my mind, and I'm sure April is on yours, is what kind of investment is taking place in keeping us ahead of the curve. And you see an image here in front of you in which we've got an angioplex image. So the angiography that's been taken and it's overlaid on a black and white image of the fundus behind us. You can see in images like this where first off, for most of us coming out of school now, we may have seen these things, but those of us like myself and April and Paul, who graduated quite a few years earlier, none of this stuff existed before. So how do we tackle this? Well, the images don't have to just be ahead of the curve, but they have to be something that's easy to use. This image that I've got in front of us, April, this is the first time I think that this has really been put out there nationally. That's a 14 by 14 millimeter montage of a series of 8 by 8 scans. So what happens in this particular image, this is coming out in 11.1 on the series with angiography, is a series of images are taken. The technician doesn't have to direct them. It's machine guided basically to grab these. They're montaged, and then what you just saw there was the black and white with the overlaid depth imaging associated. What do you think of that image, April?
It's amazing.
How would you use something like this just for a moment in practice? What could you see? How could you see a patient engaging with this?
You know, I think it, like you said before, for a patient to come into our office and see something like this, it will completely change their entire thought process of why they come to the eye doctor. I mean, it's incredible. They will know the difference in a practice when they can see what's happening in their own eye. Hopefully it will change behaviors for them as well. So they'll be more compliant and we'll see better outcomes and better vision long term.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This second image here, similar type stuff. Again, you've got a montage. Here you've got a number of 6 by 6 images, so 6 millimeter by 6 millimeter images that have been stitched together. And then again, that same overlay with the depth imaging and being able to know at what level we're looking at things. It's just pretty phenomenal in terms of the technologies that are coming down the pipe and really right around the corner. But how about the stuff that exists today? So in practice today for April, for myself, for Paul, one of the things that we really need is the ability to detect, and this I think for all of you, the ability to detect early what's happening around diabetic changes. Gone are the days in which we try to take a photograph alone. we need resolution, we need the ability to tackle issues associated with blood flow. And so on this particular image, you can see a contrast of an image without clinical diabetic retinopathy and one that's a non-diabetic patient. Both of these, when you would look at the image in the retina on a traditional photo or maybe with a 90D lens, you're not going to see a whole lot going on. But as you can see with angioplex, you've got areas of foveolar vascular zone dropout, you've got small microaneurysms. Those are critical factors. How do they show up though when we get into a traditional OCT? So here we have a known diabetic patient. In this particular case, if you look at the side-by-side comparisons of the same eye, or the right eye and the left eye, I should say, these are normal OCTs. Anybody who could dial into this and spend some time just going through the tomogram slices and spending time reviewing this wouldn't see too much going on that looks wrong or off. As a matter of fact, when it compares to the normative databases, it seems like this person's as healthy as could be. But when we look a little bit deeper and we've got something like OCT angiography, as we did in the preceding slides, here we see on a 3x3 segment of the fovea that there's a lot of disruption at the foveolar vascular zone. And so there's a circle that's on this particular slide that we're looking at that is drawing our attention. And in that particular area, when we zoom in just a little bit more, we see broken areas of the foveolar vascular zone, we see some early microaneurysms, and we know that those microaneurysms and the detection of those microaneurysms are the earliest sign in the body of any sort of changes associated with diabetes. So that would include nephropathy, diabetic retinopathy, and the like. Now we have the ability with an imaging device that captures this in 3 seconds to see that level of detail and engage a patient who in the past, 5 years ago, 3-4 years ago even, I might have done a traditional OCT on, looked with the 90 diopter lens, said, hey, you're in great shape. Here we have a microaneurysm. And I think that's the important piece to keep in mind as we go through this, is that when we look with the new technologies, we need to be able to have a technology that differentiates from what our traditional training and things are. And I think the other question that this brings up for me, and April, I'm not sure where you fall on this, but the other question it brings up is, if I can do this on a patient that doesn't have any clinical signs, and this patient reports that maybe they're a diabetic, but they're well controlled, what does that argue for the general population? I mean, for me, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Does this become the gold standard? Does this replace, right now we dilate every patient. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think it makes us all know that we really don't have enough right now without technology to be able to do a fabulous job for our patients. And really, that's what I'm in the game to do. I want to do the best job I can.
Yeah, so bigger discussion, but definitely gives us some food for thought. The second case, another healthy patient with diabetes. You can see on the OCT report that's here, again, normative findings across the entire piece, compares really well. The ETDRS map doesn't show any thickness changes that are going on. And then when we dive a little bit deeper into this and we look at a 6x6 angioplex that was taken, you can see in the entire map there on the left and the map of the deep retinal plexus that there are changes. There are physical changes in the capillaries. You see a bunch of capillary dropout, possibly some early microaneurysms, and this is on a low resolution 6x6 OCT. So you're not looking at a 3x3 millimeter segment where maybe there's a little bit more data concentrated over a smaller area, but we can clearly see it. And when we look in that deep retinal plexus, there is just a bunch of loss around the capillaries, and again, those kind of microaneurysms and things that are existing. These things they give me a lot of concern. When I look at this and know that I missed this in the past, the first thing I think that oftentimes comes up with patients in conversation is they go, well, why didn't we see this last time? And my response to them has to be, we didn't have the ability to do it. And we couldn't see, or we couldn't operate in this mode before. They said, so what are you doing as we go forward? Well, we're continuing to invest in technology, and these technologies that we have now give us a lot more information. So the patients are engaged, they understand that change is coming, but how does that sit with the rest of our colleagues out there and all of you who are listening and participating in this? I would urge you to really consider, does your technology allow you to stay ahead of the curve and really challenge, in what you do. So another piece of technology that has changed today is ultra wide field. And in the past, we've all gotten used to an ultra wide field sort of modality that provides us with a decent view of the periphery, maybe isn't super patient friendly in the way in which the exam is taken, but we all know that if technology is worth it, we invest in it, even if it's not the most conducive from a patient perspective. So what are new technologies in terms of ultra wide field, though, that they're out now? And I would argue that there are two, probably three main pieces about ultra wide field that I really look for. One, patient comfort. And I think that that's a big one. We're in a very high touch environment with our patients. Our patients have a lot of choice in the marketplace, trying to be aware of and sensitive to their choice, and the way in which we conduct our evaluations or exams, becomes an important piece. The second, and I think the very critical pieces for us in the exam room, though, really focus a little bit more around resolution and really around true color. Is it what does it look like, what we really know it should look like? And so with that, I just want to reintroduce, for those of you who have already heard this about the Claris, but for those of you who haven't and don't know about Claris, I want to introduce to you Claris, which I think is a phenomenal piece of technology that allows us to get an ultra wide field image through a two-stitched montage. The views are amazing, and let me just demonstrate those to you here on the screen, because I could go into a bunch of words, but you can see here on the screen what a traditional fundus image looks like when we're looking with a 90 diopter lens or a direct ophthalmoscope, and now what we have with wide field. And that image that you're looking at there is not a staged image. As we'll dive into here in a few moments, you'll see that images across patients with disease and problems associated with diabetes and a host of other conditions also get an equally clear image that goes from the posterior pole all the way out to the periphery. True color, as I referenced just a few moments ago, is another really important factor, especially when we're going to be evaluating change in the nerve over time and pallor, things like that. We all know that getting a good photograph in traditional photography in eye care can be a little bit challenging at times, and some of the players out there struggle with true color because they're not actually using the full spectrum in their lighting sources. So they might be using a scanning laser technology or a single source light emitting diode. Here you've got a red, green, blue spectrum, and that's why in the Claris that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, you see actually a true color. It looks like that when you look through a 90 diopter lens, as well as when you're getting the image from the Claris. When it comes to the photography and being able to capture an image, this is a single image of a Claris. And on this particular image, you'll notice that there are findings associated with diabetes in this particular eye. But what's really cool is that was a single shot. And when we dial it in a little bit more, I'll just flip back to that for a moment. When we dial it all the way in, you can see that the resolution here in the posterior pole is quite significant, and we could even blow that up a little bit more and look at some of the vasculature and changes that we're seeing here with this diabetic patient. In this particular case, where we've got a side-by-side comparison, this is the same eye. It's just taken with two wide field devices, the Claris and a kind of a traditional or previous market leader in wide field. You'll see that we want to see a little bit more of what's going on at the posterior pole. And April, you and I know this already just from practice and what we've seen, but you can see that image is beautiful there on the left-hand side. It is an image that we would love to have taken with a traditional fundus camera, but this was taken with an ultra wide field, and being able to dive into that level of detail, you can contrast it with the image that's on the right, and there's just no difference there. April, what does that mean to you in practice?
I think that we need to be able to look at a picture and know that it's a true picture. We need to be able to look at detail and then be able to follow patients over time. And it's very difficult to do that without a clear image.
Sure. Just another image getting out into the periphery. I think that, again, staying on course with not just the true image, but being able to get great resolution out into the periphery. So you can go from that posterior pole and then extending this out into the periphery. We see that resolution is consistent all the way across the set of retinal images that we just took.
So those are some really great cases, Aaron. So a little bit more about, the value of predominantly peripheral diabetic retinopathy lesions. There was a study published a couple of years ago and some follow-up now from the Joslin Diabetes Center showing that people that have predominantly peripheral diabetic retinopathy, so more lesions outside of the central 45 degrees than within the central 45 degrees, those folks are about 3 times more likely to develop a significant worsening of their diabetic retinopathy and almost 5 times more likely to develop proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And in fact, the Diabetic Retinopathy Clinical Research Network, which is this consortium of a bunch of retinal specialty practices trying to pool all their data together to get quicker results in terms of new treatments for diabetes, diabetic retinopathy, diabetic macular edema. The newest protocol, which is AA, is looking at this exact question. Does evaluating the peripheral retina help us to predict which patients are going to go on and develop significant diabetic retinopathy and require earlier intervention and more frequent follow-up? So that trial is ongoing right now, Protocol AA. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of the Claris specifically, in addition to giving us spectacularly high quality ultra wide field and wide field retinal images, is the ability to use fundus autofluorescence to detect diabetic retinopathy lesions that might not be caught otherwise. So this was an interesting study showing that FAF shows significantly more microaneurysms than does standard color photography or even black on white color photography. So FAF highlights these lesions. It's exquisitely sensitive at picking up on blood vessel abnormalities and, for that matter, retinal hemorrhages. And so it's something that I'm using now more and more frequently when I'm screening patients for diabetic retinopathy. Looking at the FAF image allows me to see more of what's going on in that patient's fundus. So now we're going to switch back to Aaron and April, who are going to go over some very interesting cases with respect to OCT use and OCTA in several different conditions.
So I want to dive into one final case here before I pass it off, April, a little bit more to get into even more nuts and bolts on what this looks into practice. This, unfortunately, is a case in which I don't have an ultra wide field image for. And the reason that I don't have an ultra wide field image in this particular case is because this patient passed away before the technology existed for us. Now, even OCT angiography, this patient wasn't able to sit for because that technology wasn't available for us. This was a 38-year-old male that I saw in my practice, 20/20 contact lens wearer with absolutely no significant health problems. Maybe he was a little bit carrying a little bit of extra, few extra pounds, but didn't have any other challenges. And what you're seeing is 2 macular OCTs. So at the time, we were taking macular OCTs on every single patient that we saw. And we started to pick up some early and subtle changes in this particular patient. And what this caused us to do was dive a little bit deeper. And when we dove deeper and sent this individual in for a set of labs, just to kind of give you some context, he had an A1C of north of 13. And the rest of his labs, as you could imagine, were completely out of whack as well. He had 2 young little girls and his wife. As we tested a little bit further, looking at both eyes and using the technology that we had at the time, he went on to develop papilledema. The papilledema we ended up being able to get it under control as we got his diabetes under control. And eventually, though, he succumbed to his disease. And I was his wife came into the practice one day just to let us know, but she didn't just let us know that we had lost him to the disease, but she was letting us know because she was so appreciative of the extra years of life that she ended up having. And Paul stated this a little bit earlier, but with regards to patients, that 10% of the patients with diabetes present for the first time in their condition to the ER with myocardial infarction. I think that's something really to keep in mind. In this particular case, while we weren't able to see this individual through on the condition, him spending those few extra years with those two daughters and with his wife was a really, really important piece. And I think it's a sombering note of the role that we can play and do play in our patients' lives on a daily basis. And so with that, and not to leave us on a downer at all, but with that, I want to pass this over to April, because putting this together in practice on a day in, day out basis becomes just the most imperative piece for me and what we can do for our patients. So April, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Aaron. You know, it's interesting, as he said, the one thing that I think we all agree on, and if you've ever heard me speak before, I'll tell you, and I've said it before, we get paid to solve our patients' problems. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we make them see, we do a lot of things, we save people's lives, we change their lives. But what they come in expecting from us is that we are going to solve the problems, and some of them that they don't even know exist. And so if we look at how do we put this together in practice, we've heard a lot of things about how this is important and the difference it can make to our practice. But what I do in my office is anyone who comes into the office who's getting a comprehensive eye health evaluation, that for me includes an OCT screening, their visual field screening, and then wide field photos. If they're paying cash, it's part of that entire process. It's not an extra charge. If it's an insurance patient, if they're coming in with any type of insurance plan, and we still want to do it as a screening, which means it's done before the doctor sees the patient. And so there will be an extra charge for those patients. And then I think the last thing, as you see on the slide, all results are reviewed with concern or celebration. And so what does that mean? That means when a patient comes in, they have these images done, we don't just take them and then I look at them in the back room and then we move on with the exam. I'll go in and we'll open up the images in Forum. We show the patients exactly what we've done that day and how amazing it is that everything's okay. And then what we're going to do next year to be able to compare over time. And that's the nice thing about having multiple technologies and having Forum, because you can bring all of it together in one concise photo, an image, one screen, to be able to demonstrate to your patient all of the things that you found that day. And not only be able to show them all the results, but be able to talk through it so they know the importance and what makes us different. So let's talk about a patient that actually came into the office and how this all took place. So this patient actually came in with his wife. She is a patient of mine. He had never seen me before. And she brought him in to see me because he'd been having difficulty with his vision. So let's look at the stats here. He's a 46-year-old Black male, decreased vision in his right eye for a few days, he says, and he describes it to me as a darkness over his vision. He says he has diabetes. He knows he does. It was diagnosed about a year ago. He has no idea what any of his numbers are and admits that he's not at all compliant with anything a doctor has told him in the past. His last eye exam was 10 years ago and he wears no glasses. So again, he came in to see me because his wife said, she comes in to see me, she's had multiple issues herself, but she brings him in, she's sitting in the exam room with him, and it was actually so wonderful when you have the ability to change people's lives like this. She says, you know, Dr. Jasper, I brought him in to see you. You're not on our insurance plan. We don't care. We just want to see you because we know that you can figure this out and figure it out quick. And, you know, it sounds silly to think that people put time ahead of sometimes their health, but I don't think we put time ahead of our health. What we do is we want to have the best of all worlds. Everybody has a job, they have to go back to work, and to be able to know that they're going to go to a practice where a doctor has technology that they'll be able to use to determine what the problem is and figure it out quickly and come up with a solution, that's worth gold. So now let's look at what the numbers are. So his vision, best corrected vision in his right eye was 20/70 and left eye 20/25. His pressures are 44 and 43. And you can imagine I double and triple checked. And his cup to disc ratio you see as well. So he came in with blurred vision. this is what we end up finding. And that's not uncommon. But what I love about having the technology that we have in our practice is that here's a diabetic patient coming in thinking diabetes is his problem. And in the slides we've seen before this, many times diabetes is. In this case, look at what the pictures show. So here you can see the macula, right eye, left eye. And as you look at this image, we can see that even though this patient came in thinking maybe it was one thing, and I don't know that he had any idea what was going on, we can see what he ends up having is central serous retinopathy. And if we look at the next image, what you're going to see is the macula next to the nerve. So now we know he comes in with blurred vision. That's his biggest concern. He's not really too worried about the fact that he's got pressures of 44 and 43. He doesn't know what that means. To him, he just says, Dr. Jasper, fix my vision. So here's what we have for his images. The challenge now I have is that we're not on his insurance plan. As we all know, he's going to need a little more care than just his visit today. And so now I have the images to be able to show him and say, this is what's going on. And this is what we really need to be thinking about as far as what to do next. But I think that as we look back and we talked about true images and we talk about, are we getting a real picture? It can be very challenging when we don't have the right technology because we don't have an ability to put together all of the facts and again, be able to solve our patients' problems in the best way. What we ended up doing with this patient is I was able to get on the phone and get him in to see a doctor that day who was on his insurance. I reassured them they were not happy about having to go see someone else, but I explained to them this is a long-term process. I would love to have you keep coming in to see me, but if you would go to see this doctor this time, let them help us get started on the right path, and let's order the tests we need to order under your insurance, and then we'll get you back in to see us.
April, I got a question for you. On a case like that, and we've seen these images and can definitely understand even from your presentation here on how you would relate it to the patient. What percentage, maybe that's not even a percentage, but give us a rough guess. How many of those patients stick with you even after you've had to refer them in and get them care because of their insurance?
It may seem hard to believe, but I will tell you right now that number is close to 80%. Because what people are finding now is that their deductibles are high, their copays are high, and they don't find that even in some of the practices they go to that are on their insurance, they don't see the technology that we have. And so if you go back to what matters to patients, what matters to them is they go to a doctor who is good, and that would be, I think, most of us, if not all of us on this today. And anybody who's watching, I believe we all have skills. The challenge, though, is do we have the technology to be able to make us really amazing at our job? And I can't bear it when a patient comes in and I can't figure out for them what's going on. I think that's a problem we probably all have, Aaron. I want to fix it. I want to know what it is right now. And I'm as impatient about it as I think they are.
Definitely. So how do you put it together? We spoke and you referenced a little bit about Forum, and just to reiterate for a moment there too, the things that we were both, I think, talking about just prior to even getting on and doing this today. Here you've got the true image that we talked about. We want that resolution. We want to make sure that we've got the best and the latest in the standard of care, but that now is transitioning. Right? We're in a data-driven world. Talk to us a little bit about what Forum has meant to your practice and why you use Forum. And by the way, that's what we're looking at now for those of you who are wondering, where do I get a piece of technology like this? This is a view inside of Forum of an angioplex, so an angiogram that's been overlaid on a retinal image and giving you change over time. Talk to us a little bit about that, April.
You know, I jumped into the whole world of Forum early on, and I found that it was one of those things where, as an image management software, a lot of people don't understand the value and don't even look into it because they don't see that they can bill a code to an insurance plan for a purchase like that. The problem is without it, you have no good way to be able to bring all of these images together. And at the beginning, it was just a matter of viewing software. What it's really turned into, though, Forum has become so much bigger than that because it allows us to look for change over time. It allows you to, as Aaron said, and he'll show you here on this image, bring all these pictures together, all of the data that you're collecting, and be able to then dive into it and look at the data in a deeper way right there on the screen in front of the patient in real time, and be able to then take images from 3 months ago, 2 weeks ago, last year, bring them together, and software within Forum that actually shows you change over time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's also critical to keep in mind is that we've got a set of the screen that we're looking at here, very high resolution angiograms that have been taken, and they're the images are being montaged or overlaid against a set of retinal images that were taken on the same device. But if you want to really take this stuff and unlock it, I think that's where you start to be able to mix and match. And so if you've got a device that's able to take a high resolution retinal image, and you can overlay something like we're looking at here, where we've got enhanced depth imaging of the of the capillary plexus that's surrounding the optic nerve. But let's say we took this even a little bit further, which is available internationally and going through some clearance with the FDA right now here in the US. If you have the ability in this particular image, April, to take and know what the change over time in the capillary perfusion was. So now you're looking at a superior nerve finding and you think maybe there's some glaucoma there. What does that capillary change over time look like, or any other condition for that matter? In diabetes, it's going to be mission critical that we're watching the capillaries. These types of new changes, I think, are really exciting. And if you don't build it on the bedrock of a great retinal imaging platform that can take a true color set of images that is able to give you high resolution, and that resolution now is able to be delivered in such a fashion so that you can take your angiogram and lay these two on top of each other, then you've invested in, unfortunately, some maybe good technology, but not necessarily the right technology to tell the entire story for patients and to kind of prove the point. In Forum in particular, and I want to just jump on one more thing that you said there, April. Forum is a data management system. It's not just grabbing a couple of thumbnails. It's what's happening inside the data. And even on this picture here, you see this little orange spot right in the middle of the angiogram. That is actually a measured foveal vascular zone. You want to know what that size looks like over time. We've seen plenty of other and we're talking here about diabetes, but we've seen plenty of studies more recently around cognitive function and nerve fiber layer thickness. When we start to need data like that to counsel our patients and to drive them in the right places for their care and their well-being, it's really important that our software tools and technologies are there to support us and can put it all together. April, any closing thoughts? Any more? What would you leave our colleagues with if you could leave them with one more piece?
You know, I think that all it takes is for us as individuals to be the patient one time in our life and see how disjointed sometimes other offices are, not even in eye care, but overall. But all it takes is one time, and it makes you appreciate so much the fact that you can go into a practice like ours, be able to go in with an issue in mind, something that's bothering you, something that needs to be resolved, and know with peace of mind that you're at the right place because you have the technology in the building. The doctor there knows how to bring all of the data together to be able to solve your problems today. And maybe I can't fix it. Maybe as the doctor, I wasn't able to fix the problem at that moment in time. But in the case I showed you, that patient was able to leave having an exact knowledge, exact understanding of what was going on. And I can tell you the other thing that really does make a difference, like Aaron made reference to, when you can explain to a patient and show them the data and break it down to them in a simple way, you can take a non-compliant diabetic patient and turn them around. You can totally change their life because now they've seen, not to be funny, but they've seen with their own eyes exactly how this disease is going to impact them and is already. So it's a life-changing experience as a doctor to have technology and to have the tools in my hands to be able to change my patients' lives.
You know, April, I love something that you just highlighted there with regards to you've got this long view. you've got a long-term relationship view with your patient, and you're investing in the technology in your practice because you care for these people over time. And it sounds to me, and I know from knowing you over the years, that you do intend to care for them for many years to come. And that's unique about us as eye care providers, in particular, I think, optometry and the role that we take, the effort that we make in that regard. So with that, I want to pass this back over to Paul and have him give us a few of his pearls associated with helping patients with diabetes manage and conquer this condition so that they can live amazingly healthy lifestyles. And we can take what we've done in the exam room as we've engaged patients, as they've seen their images, as we've taken the data, as we've invested in technologies that create for us platforms by which we are seen as the leading expert, or at least as the quarterback in that role play with patients in this condition. I'll hand it to Paul and let him leave us with a few of his amazing pearls here today. So thank you so much for this time to address you. April, it was great presenting with you as well. Paul, why don't you take it from here?
So a really awesome presentation by both of my colleagues. How can we use this technology to help us address the diabetes epidemic? So what it allows us, I think, in broad scope is earlier detection of undiagnosed diabetes in this 8+% number of patients that have diabetes but have not been identified as having diabetic retinopathy, that have pre-diabetes, and we can detect it earlier with this technology. It allows us earlier detection of diabetic retinopathy lesions through looking at the ultra wide field images, looking at perfusion of the foveal avascular zone. It allows earlier intervention. And I think it's really important that we, as primary care providers, as optometrists, that's what most of us are, that we have to remember prevention is better than cure. So if we can prevent people from getting diabetic retinopathy by talking with them about improved metabolic control, or helping them delay the diagnosis of diabetes by taking a walk 30 minutes a day, which has been shown to cut the risk of developing type 2 diabetes in high-risk patients by about 60%. So these are great things we can do. But if we can prevent diabetes in the first place, that's really kind of one of the things I try to focus on in my practice, where I have thousands of patients now that have pre-diabetes, and they want to know, how do I go about not developing eye disease? And I tell them the main way is by not getting diabetes in the first place. We can have a big impact on our patients by talking to them about prevention. With that, I'll bid you adieu. It's been a real honor presenting today with Aaron and April, and we're going to be hanging around after this presentation to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks very much.